We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Please be seated. So, approval of the agenda. Could I have a mover and a seconder for approval of the agenda? Moved by Trustee King, seconded by... You need a seconder?
Trustee Shan.
Trustee Shan seconding, and all in favor? Just a raise of hands. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The agenda is approved. Do we have any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Seeing none, we'll move forward in the agenda. The next item we have is delegations. And we do have a delegation with regard to the annual enrollment in early and middle French immersion programs, 2023-24, and core French immersion programs, 22-23. And the delegate, Mary Cruden of Canadian Parents for French, Ontario. Could we ask the guests beside the delegate to also identify themselves?
Oh. Are we on? Okay. I was going to introduce Sharon, but would you like me to, or you want to introduce yourself? Okay. With me is Sharon Beeston, who is a longtime Canadian Parents for French extraordinary volunteer and also a volunteer long-term at the TDSB. Is that good? Merci. De rien.
Okay, thank you so much. Welcome. So you have 5 minutes to present your delegation, and after that, we'll allow trustees to ask any questions that they may have.
Okay, thank you. Very nice to be here in person, first time in several years. So, as mentioned, I'm here on behalf of Canadian Parents for French. It's a national volunteer organization that promotes and supports opportunities for young people to learn French as a second official language. We started in 1977, just around the time French immersion became part of the Ontario education landscape. Our core funding comes from the federal government, and we receive grants from the Ministry of Education to work with families in support of the goals outlined. Hold on a sec. Can we stop the clock for a sec? Sorry. Stopped. I'm a little out of practice, I guess. Okay, so we work in support of the goals outlined in this policy document from the Ministry of Education. The annual enrollment report in front of you started in 2005 after a strong push from parents who wanted public, regular information about these key indicators on access to French programs. I would draw your attention to the annual report of our good friends at the FSL-CIC, of which I am also a member, as the committee has been asking for updates of the same data that I believe you will be discussing in Business Arising. CPF Ontario supports the public sharing of this data as a way to identify current and emerging challenges to having French programs that reflect the diversity of the student population, including students with spec ed needs and English language learners. That's from the framework, which is also reflected in Policy 80 of the TDSB. But by providing updates to the data that was in the 2018 full French review, parents, families, community, trustees, and staff will be able to see where we have met with success and where we need to focus now to achieve the policy objectives and to meet the needs and aspirations of TDSB students and their families. I want to thank TDSB staff, particularly the small but mighty Central FSL team led by Angela Kakamo, Central Coordinating Principal, and Kirsten Johnson, Central Coordinator, for their diligent and methodical work with planning and trustees to locate new programs across the city in underserved areas and to help achieve the equity goals we all share. Perhaps a bit more space for parent and community voice in some of those decisions would be a good idea and might help to get ahead of the concerns identified in the Globe and Mail article that came out yesterday. At Amalgamation more than 20 years ago, commitments were made to intensive French programs to be equitably distributed and accessible to all who wish to participate. The current program location map on the TDSB website shows enormous improvement and attention to removing the single most significant barrier to participation, the one that is entirely under the control of the TDSB, and that is the distance between French immersion programs. Parents want their children's school to be as close to their home as possible. By adding new sites while also accepting every on-time applicant and providing transportation based on the same distance criteria as the English program, the TDSB is moving forward in achieving French as a second language programming that is indeed for all students, accessible for all students. More work does need to be done, however, to get enrollment back up to the pre-COVID peak, which was about 2019-2020 data, but the trends are really encouraging. The transition to middle French immersion and JK entry for early French immersion took place during the pandemic, which, I don't need to tell you folks how challenging that was for the board. Research shows us that providing the opportunity to develop French proficiency benefits students cognitively and gives them a skill which provides increased opportunity for jobs and income throughout their adult lives. We thank you again for supporting students and parents to access to French immersion under the strategic directions noted in the enrollment report of transform student learning and equity of access to learning opportunities for all students. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions from trustees? Trustee King? Oh, I thought you were waving at me. So I'm going to pass. Okay, so I'm going to pass the chair so I can ask a question. Okay. So I just wanted you to clarify, maybe expand a little bit. You mentioned an article that had come out yesterday. Could you maybe expand, clarify on that point?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to expand a little bit on that. That was kind of I was planning on being here anyway, just to talk about the enrollment report, and then all of a sudden this thing dropped yesterday. I really feel for the parents at Blake Public School. Back in the day, my children attended Swansea Public School, and even though our school had at least a couple of hundred kids in it that were living in a public housing, we didn't have access to the kind of funding and supports that the Model Schools Initiative started. And clearly, these are things that all students who have needs should be receiving in the community or through their schools. So the thing that kind of concerns me is the connection to French immersion. French immersion didn't cause poverty or gentrification or any of the things that are kind of loosely linked in the article. French immersion is an education program that's actually an equity asset for kids who might be otherwise disadvantaged in the system because it gives them this marketable skill for life. And so we certainly welcome the review of the Learning Opportunities Index, and I personally, from my experience at Swansea, no amount of fundraising and community effort can take all of the hard edges off poverty. We had a skate exchange, free books, we had winter coats, we had tried to do everything we could to help the less fortunate in our school. But we were never able to access any of those funds because they're given out on the average. So if you have high income, low income, and medium income in the same school, we were never part of that model schools conversation. And it breaks my heart that these services are not universally available. And I think the pockets of poverty that exist in all of our schools of Toronto need to be addressed better. I know TDSB strives to do that every day, and certainly the other orders of government need to come through to help in that work. So we need to have a caring and kind community all around, and people obviously need the resources to survive and thrive in our city. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other questions in the room or online? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much for your delegation. We appreciate hearing the feedback and input from parents and our community.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on in the agenda. The next item is the Community Advisory Committee reports. We have the Parent Involvement Community Advisory Committee report of June 6, 2023. School councils and advisory committees communication tools. Is there anyone to speak to this?
Andrew Waters, co-chair of PIAC.
Andrew Waters, co-chair of PIAC. Yes, 5 minutes, yes. No. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the summary of the motion is up. There has been basically to access for school councils and for like co-chairs and those pieces to be able to communicate with the school council, and for school council members to be able to communicate. The tools that the TDSB are providing are based on having the ability to have TDSB email account, and this has been an ongoing issue for years and years and years. And there was some additional one resources that was put towards it, and there has been work done on it. But again, this is still an extreme limiting factor for school councils. And again, parent and caregiver time is precious, the volunteer time that they commit. And the TDSB should be making every effort, and TDSB staff, to make it as easy as possible for parents to provide the volunteer the time they have to support their community and the children and students at their schools. And so I encourage the board to again look at this issue. Like it just constantly, like, emails get reset, lost access. I know myself when I was, and I'm a co-chair of PIAC, I critically lost access to my email 2 weeks in September when I was trying to set up meetings and those pieces. And again, it just happened, decide to reset all the passwords, even though I have a 2-year term. So there just seems to be, there needs to be improvement from staff to facilitate this. And again, not to, get in the way of parents being able to, support their communities, and again, support parent engagement and caregiver engagement is sort of the gist of this piece. We understand there was comments made at the meeting that this is an operational piece and should be directed back to the director. We are engaging the director directly, but again, I do think that trustees and school board in general. I was just at a meeting today around school safety, and one of the key determinants is parents' involvement and caregivers' involvements in children's lives. And the board should be making every effort to make sure that parents can commit to engaging in the school community and not face these administrative barriers. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Mr. Waters. So I'm going to ask staff if you have any comments before I go to trustee questions.
Test, test. Thank you. And through the chair, I'm going to turn it over to Executive Superintendent Uton Robinson.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you very much for bringing this forward. We want to have this once again returned back to staff. Most recently, staff did present to PIAC in terms of two staff, Peter Singh as well as Kevin Bradbury, that addressed the points that were raised, as well as Michelle Monroe, and we will look at these again and come back going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to trustee Laskin.
Madam Chair, I'm not a member of the committee, but I think for as long as I've been sitting in this chair, this has been an issue. And I can only imagine the frustration on the school council chairs and co-chairs, and I simply do not understand, as a workaround until this is actually fixed, that if school council chairs or co-chairs provide their email address, no, I'm not talking about the school council email address, but their email address as they used to do, and agreed that that can be shared for TDSB purposes only and waive any other privacy concerns, then that should immediately happen as the workaround. I mean, before we had the school messenger emails, I used to have all the emails of my school council chairs. They used to agree by me sending them an email and they responding that they'd agreed to receive communication. Those that didn't agree to get communication were not sent communication. So it's simply simple. And I would really appreciate when this does get referred back to staff by a member of the committee, that this workaround be immediately implemented. I know I received pushback even last year when I asked one of my superintendents for a school council chair email address, and I was told I could not have that because it was their personal. I found another way to work around to email them directly. I mean, I just think we are a great system, but we love bureaucracy. And at some point, we have to cut to the chase and come up with a solution. And I seriously believe that if parents agree, and some parents won't, and I respect that, and then they can get that information through their principal. But if they agree, then that is what should happen now, while all this stuff gets worked out, because it has been years, not months, it has been years of this system not working. And I couldn't agree more with the deputant. The communication to and from the board through PIAC is essential. Those are my comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Trustee King?
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you, Trustee Laskin, for those comments. I just wanted to chime in briefly as the trustee co-chair on the committee. So I've been present for many of these conversations and discussions, and I can attest to the level of frustration that Trustee Laskin has alluded to, and the amount of time spent on these kinds of operational issues rather than, the deeper concerns and opportunities that I think, we all really want to be focused on. So I completely recognize that this is an operational issue, but I think, whenever we see that frustration and the slow resolution of these issues operationally, then we see them come to this table as well. And I appreciate the PIAC chairs wanting to let trustees know as well what the experience is for them and what their abilities are to communicate well and to perform their role. So I also hope that as this goes back to staff, that there could be a really rapid and really thoughtful response to help ease some of the barriers that we've heard.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Trustee Earhart, and then Trustee King, and then Trustee Hastings. Trustee Earhart?
Thank you. Just quickly, I wanted to thank Trustee King in particular this year. As a new trustee this year, I know Trustee King has spent a lot of time liaising around this email issue, and I will say that our experience in getting two new PIAC reps this year, I want to thank staff who worked very closely and diligently to get PIAC email account access for PIAC members. I'm still unclear how many of our councils are able to access. I know some problem has gone on years, but for PIAC, I will say it took a significant number of hours, both of staff, of multiple trustees, and of PIAC reps to gain access, and particularly for new volunteers, and considering after COVID in particular, we are trying to get lots of new people involved and trying to build up broader, more equitable access. It is something that is that I'm seeing as a barrier. And so I'm very grateful that this is being brought forward. I'm very grateful to Trustee King for her continued support for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. Trustee Dawson?
Thank you, through the chair. I just want to thank PIAC for bringing this forward and echo some of the comments that we've already heard. As a former school council co-chair myself for 7 years, I was never able to access the school email account. We continued to operate via Gmail, and that allowed us, as different people transitioned into various roles, to have everything on OneDrive and share information that way. We never were able to access our account. And so it frustrates me to no end. It's actually, I mean, we already have so much distrust towards us in the system that it is just an unnecessary frustration that continues to compile that trust, that lack of trust. So I really hope staff will take this seriously. It is beyond my understanding as to why I, as a trustee, can get an email set up for me immediately at the start of my term, and any new staff member can, yet the school councils aren't able to access their emails. It is also a running joke online. So there's a Facebook group called GTA School Councils, and every single September, October, I see these posts flying around. Can you access your school messenger account? And nobody can. And enough is enough. Like, why, to staff, what's the issue? Why aren't they able to access their accounts after, at least 7 years in my experience? I agree with Trustee Laskin that there should be immediate permission and communicated, so actually officially communicated to school councils that they can use either their own personal emails or a school council Gmail. Last year, when I was planning my first ward forum for school council chairs, I couldn't invite them. There was no way for me to invite them. I reached out to the Parent and Community Engagement Office, and I was given all of the official school council emails. Didn't get one reply. Not one, because nobody could access their accounts. I had to phone around, email around to different people, ask friends that I know in the neighborhood who might be connected to school councils if I could get the contact information for the chairs, simply to invite them to my ward forum. So, I cannot stress enough that in order for us to operate efficiently, at least in the interim, for councils to be able to use and be granted permission explicitly to use their personal emails in the form of a communication, explicit direction from the TDSB. I would like to understand from staff if that is possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson. The next person on this, Do we have a response?
Yep, through the chair, and thank you for the question. And I hear the frustration, and I think that certainly we have heard part of this before, and part of what's happening, my understanding through our IT folks, is that when a board email is set up, in the case of a trustee or a staff member, that individual will have that email account until they leave the employment of the board or the term of trustee comes to an end. Part of the challenge, I believe, through our IT folks is that each year as we set up the actual school representative email, the individuals who have those emails, at the end of the year, either we have to figure out how to reset all of those because the individuals don't always, are not in that role for more than 1 year, or the individual leaves based on the fact that their child graduates and they are no longer in that particular role. So we have to be able to reset those particular passwords and determine which individuals are there for longer periods. We are happy to look at the notion of providing direction with respect to what Trustee Laskin has outlined, which is a method that is used across our system in many places. But staff will definitely take this back and certainly hear the concern that has been raised, and we know that this has been a long issue or concern that has been raised before. So we will take action on it. Thank you.
Thanks. So just through the chair, a supplementary comment. I'm not sure I understand the resetting of the emails. So it's one thing if you initiate individual emails to the co-chairs that have their name in them, but the school council emails are like school council 123 at tdsbon.ca. So it's, my understanding is that the rationale for that partly was so that all the email history could be kept throughout the course of many changes. So I'm not understanding what you're saying. Why do we have to deactivate and then?
So thank you, and through the chair, when one particular individual retires from being the particular rep, partly what has to happen is that that rep has to inform us that they no longer will be the rep the following year, such that we can then reset that particular password and then provide that access to that password to the next person. At times, in 500 and whatever number of schools, that doesn't always happen. So it has to be initiated somewhere that, hey, I'm no longer going to be the rep for this particular school. The new person needs to be in this particular role. And so part of it is that communication with individuals that may or may not be in that role. Some people will inform the board and inform our folks so that we can actually do that resetting. Others may not, and then you have a patch board type of approach to it. But we will certainly take this and try and figure out how we get a better way to do it, because I can hear the frustration in our parent groups on this. Thank you.
Okay, through the chair, thanks. I know this is an operational motion, but to the PIAC folks on the line, I totally agree with it. If I were able, I would vote yes. But I do believe it is operational. I am totally distrustful personally as a former school council parent that this will be resolved quickly. I can only hope that communication as to an interim measure will be put in place ASAP. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Hastings.
Good afternoon, Dennis Hastings. I have two fears, and they're called two words. It's governance and operational. How do you stop a system from working? This one. What do? You call it operational. And then the people sitting around this table that can have that changed will be stopped. And this is what's happened here. I have, over the years, and it's been many years, but not at this table, set up email for all my school accounts. I've set up emails for, on the other side, Catholic TAPSI, OAPSI, CPEC. And I set up all those names and it worked wonderfully. And what I'm hearing now is, I'm not sure. I'm listening to my colleagues, and they are frustrated. And what I see and what I hear is somebody or something that says, this won't work. It does work. You can give them each an identifier email, and when they leave, which they don't leave after a year, most people are still available and make themselves available for years and years. So when I sit here and I'm listening to this, I'm going, this is not fun. This is something where nobody or somebody wants not this to happen. I'd like to see it happen. I've done it before. I've had our IT department set up individual email. And if you wish, I will give you the format in which it can be done. And it
Thank you
works
so much
wonderful.
for sharing that with us, Trustee Hastings. I appreciate you sharing your personal experience in relation to this challenge. Were there any other,
Excuse me,
sorry,
I am looking for
a response?
a response. Really, I am, because I've done this over the years and it works. And I don't like to have smoke blown, and this is what's happening now. We can do this. I will give you a format if you wish to have it, on how it works. And when people stop using it, when people stop using their email, you turn it off. But in all the time you sat here, and Ms. King sat here, there is no reason to not allow.
So you wanted a response? Did staff have a comment or response?
Thank you. And once again, through the chair, I hear the frustration that's been outlined. We are happy to have the IT folks make sure that this is a priority going forward. And if that involves engaging conversation with Trustee Hastings, we're more than willing to do that, because at the end of the day, we too as staff want to try and get to a point where we can resolve this particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you for that. If I could pass the chair. So I also have experienced and understand and fully appreciate the frustration here, and also believe that, this is an operational issue that should be looked at carefully. The comments about the details of how this is implemented really needs to go to our TDSB IT, because in my experience, it's not just one email address to access, it's a two-step process, and that's in my experience. And every single year, there's issues that I've experienced for the last 10-plus years. So those are my comments. I fully appreciate the frustration. I really look to staff, and I think we're all looking to staff to really look at some long-term solutions to this ongoing issue. I'll pass back, I'll take back the chair, and I believe we have a motion.
So through all this discussion, knowing, and we've all outlined that this is an operational piece, the motion is to refer this back to staff to respond.
Seconded. Okay, moved by Trustee Rajwani, seconded by Trustee King. All in favor? Any? Okay, we're doing it on eScribe.
So sorry, it just says school councils and advisory committees communications group, but we're voting on what you just said, right? Yeah, just click on the arrow and refer to that.
Okay, mine's not coming up. Can you put
Sean in favor.
in favor? Trustee Hastings, how do you vote? Trustee Hastings is in favor. I think we actually need to hear the word.
Chernis Lynn in favor as well.
And Trustee Chernos Lynn is in favor. Does it pass?
Thanks.
Let's vote. And it passes? Okay, that motion passes. So we are going to move on, and if the co-chair of PIAC is still online, Andrew Waters, thank you so much for coming and presenting the recommendation to this committee, and I hope you have a good evening. Thank you. We're moving on in the agenda. The next item is the French as a Second Language Community Advisory Committee Annual Report. And I believe we have I think we have the co-chairs of that committee. No. Thank you so much for joining us. Could you just please identify yourselves?
Sure. My name is Lynn LeBlanc, and I'm the parent co-chair of the FSL-CAC. And with me this evening is Lisa McAvoy. She's one of our vice chairs for the committee.
Welcome. If you could begin your presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is, as I just said, I'm pleased to provide some highlights from the annual.
Excuse me, put the mic a little closer to your mouth.
Better? Is that better?
Yes.
Just let me know if people online can't hear me. I can speak louder.
Please go ahead.
So I'm pleased to provide some highlights from the annual and the enrollment report as submitted. From a committee perspective, in our annual report, we note that additional support would be welcome, particularly for FSLAC communication with school councils and parent caregivers. I did not realize this was going to be on point for this evening as your discussion. I realize there are challenges with regards to that, and I absolutely support all the comments that came here. So whatever you can do, that's amazing. We continue to seek those email addresses, and I realize that not all of them are actually operational. We do try to reach out and identify the ones that we can that are made public, but any support that we can get from the TDSB would be appreciated. We look forward to continuing to support trustees in the recruitment of new FSL members in the fall of 2023. So if you're having any ward meetings and you'd like us to show up to speak, or if you have anybody you would like to recommend to be a ward rep, let us know. If you're not sure if you have a ward rep, contact us as well. We'll make sure that we'll get that information to you. When looking at FSL programs, we're concerned that enrollment, as reported by staff at the FSLAC meetings, at the new JK entry point and for middle French immersion is not reaching the pre-COVID levels. No data has been made available about the impact of COVID on the retention in core and immersion French to grade 12. The FSLAC has raised the need for better effective communication and outreach to prospective and continuing families. I do absolutely want to do a sidebar note on this one. I realize that these programs were launched during sort of our COVID years, which we want probably to edit out of our lives. However, the JK one meant that a lot of the parents did not know that the program had changed. And that was a big, big challenge for a lot of different people. And we do think that we need to really assess how that's going to. I realize we're in year 2 and the word is going to be spreading out, and that's great. But I think we need to really focus on being able to communicate effectively so that everyone who does want a spot can apply on time and do so. In February of 2019, the FSL-CAC made a formal recommendation to PSSC asking the staff be asked to provide a briefing note on the TDSB DELF, that stands for the Diplôme d'études en langue française. Looking at making sure that we have enough staff that are trained to be able to relay that specific program. TDSB has teachers who are trained examiners, and continued provision of this training is essential into increasing opportunities for students to be able to participate in this one. It looks great on your resume, and as a young person graduating, it's amazing to be able to show how well they're doing going through the French immersion program. Transportation is another area of contention, and we'll probably be hearing a little bit more about that later. But in June 2019, all grades 7 to 12 French immersion and extended parents were advised by the TDSB that secondary students in need would be able to continue receiving support through their FI or extended school principal. The FSL-CAC is concerned that those students drop quietly out of the FI and extended rather than self-identify. While we have been assured that principals may use school funds for this, it remains unclear if the availability of this support is communicated to all grade 7 to 12 French immersion and extended student families, and how this is being addressed in the transportation review. It is currently a multi-step process. It is not incredibly fun for anybody. The administration has to do a lot of paperwork to get it through, and for the students, it's somewhat embarrassing to have to go through this through the administration, and we've certainly heard that at our committee. This is a concern. In today's day and age, a digital process should be able to be done where a parent could receive, fill out the form, and send it to the transportation process directly without having to do multiple steps through the administration and admit to everyone that they need some assistance. Diversity, and also as a sidebar on that one, there's also the question of whether you're actually communicating that to all of the new students that are coming through with this one. Diversity and inclusion impact with regards to the 2018 French Review. We're hopeful that the addition of new early French immersion sites in underserved areas in September 2022 and as well as September 2023, along with the ongoing professional development for FSL educators, will help achieve the objective of P080 to essentially have FSL classrooms that are reflective of a diverse community. However, we require detailed reporting on how we are doing in order to determine if these equity initiatives and the decisions from the French Review are having a positive impact on the inclusion in the FSL programs. As of May 2020, there's a typo, it says 2021, but that was COVID years, board meeting, the trustees adopted the recommendation of the FSL-CAC to continue annual reporting on FSL programs, including enrollment. Being able to provide some additional insights is key. We need that information to be able to properly assess how these programs are doing and where we can support or offer supports where needed across the TDSB. Inclusive practices within the FSL programs. We've made a formal recommendation for improving inclusion of students with special education needs in FSL programs and ask that the relevant section of PR 597 be revised to be more useful to parents and caregivers. This work is still needed to support students and inclusive growth in the FSL programs. Childcare is another fun one to discuss. FSL-CAC members continue to be concerned that French immersion and extended parents face additional barriers in accessing childcare that most parents in English do not. Better access to childcare can help achieve FSL classrooms that are inclusive and reflective of a diverse community. And on this point, I absolutely appreciate that childcare is a challenge across the entire TDSB. I've spoken with several other CACs over the last few years about this. We don't quite know how to best resolve this, but we do identify the areas where there are challenges. And in this case, in particular for French immersion and extended students who may not be going to their home schools, an inability to actually be able to put their names on a wait list at a school that they don't know which one they're getting in until later in the spring can cause a lot of stress for these parents. In conclusion, I just wanted to say that we are certainly working, and we do appreciate all the work that has been so far in removing the barriers, which have included childcare, as we just mentioned, communication, especially when the programs are changing, and how to be able to properly communicate to the parents at their level and where they are to be able to properly answer any questions that they might have and remove the barriers there are, and as well as supporting them at the local level for the new sites that we've included. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I want staff to comment first. So I'm going to ask staff if they have any comments to start before I go to the trustee questions. Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and through the chair, thanks for the presentation. I'm interested in, you talked about potential students dropping out due to the complicated process associated with, seeking transportation support. Did you hear that anecdotally, or do you have just parents sharing that with you, or is there a means to quantify that?
So I've heard from several different parents, both at the secondary level and at the middle school level for the grades 7, 8s, because that's kind of that weird transitional, you're no longer 12, you're moving into the 13. I've heard it from several parents who've described this, and I've actually witnessed the process myself. It's not, and I don't know, it might be different at other schools. Again, I've only been able to sort of tap into that. After that, I actually went to several different websites on these schools where there's absolutely no information there at all. So if you are a parent and you're curious about this, you literally have to dig through the TDSB website, which can or not be incredibly pleasant. But more importantly, a lot of parents don't even know that this is an option for them. So those parents might actually be dropping out of French immersion programs because of this, without even realizing that they could reach out to do that. So although it was communicated 4, 5 years ago, that communication needs to happen every year because people are matriculating through the system, right? So the people who graduated now are not necessarily going to be able to tell new parents that are coming through. And there's also some concerns at the local school level where principals are changing, where the administration is changing, and they might not be completely familiar with how to do this. So it's a paper form. As far as I can tell from the focus groups that I've been able to speak to at the secondary and middle school level, it's a paper form that needs to come from the school. The student has to go there, self-identify, request this. The paper form has to be filled out by an administration person. Then that person needs to bring, so the student then needs to pick up the form again, bring it to their parents, have it signed off, bring it back to the school, return it there, then it gets sent to, really? Like, could we really not just have a parent reach out to the principal, fill out the form digitally, forward it to the parent where they can sign off on it, and then send it to the transportation department? If it needs to go back to the school to be able to be sent to the transportation, that's a smaller detail. But it is a multi-step process, which I'm not sure, first of all, the parents know about, and secondly, it just feels like there's a better way to do it. And I appreciate that there are cuts and we have budget cuts, but there are parents that are looking at spending anywhere between $5,000 to $7,000 just to be able to participate in this if you have one child. So.
Thank you. To follow up, if I may, through the chair. A question to staff. I was just curious if at any point in time we have considered an online system that is a more streamlined, less awkward potentially for the students to come in and self-identify that they're in need of assistance. Have we given consideration to eliminating that and doing what's being suggested here, create an online process that would speed it along and alleviate that potential hurdle that some students may be reluctant to go in and share?
So thank you, and through the chair, I'm going to ask Centrally Assigned Principal Angela Kakamo to respond to the secondary part of this with respect to transportation, and we would be happy to take back the question with respect to the notion of how we change the process in order to make it more user-friendly and easier for parents that will engage conversations with our transportation folks, Gary Green and others. So we're happy to do that, but I'll ask Ms. Kakamo to make reference to the actual programming around secondary for transportation. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
evening and thank you, and through the chair. As you're aware, transportation in secondary for French immersion students is a policy decision that was made. And so if students are experiencing financial hardship, they are, as you can appreciate, we are building relationships as principals in schools and educators with our families, and around those relationships that we build, that we can provide students with access to transportation from our local school budgets. And even in middle school, as you know, students in middle school, as of the age of before the age of 13 don't require transportation. That is a TTC policy from the transportation public transit. But after that, as well, as you build relationships with students and you become aware of those needs, you can also provide that through local school budgets. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions in the room? Trustee Dawson?
Thank you, and through the chair. So first of all, I just want to thank you very much for your report and also for raising the transportation issue. I personally have followed along that application process with 2 families, and it is quite complicated and unnecessarily long. One comment I did have for staff, though, is that when students are applying for transportation, there's nothing that connects the dots between a student at their home school that might actually already qualify for transportation. So meaning there's already a bus stop for them that's available, should there be room on the bus. So if there were some way to quickly connect those things, then I think the transportation application process would be easier. Right now, it's, yeah, I understand you're taking it back, but it's a bit of a mess. I wanted to ask staff about the wait list for childcare for an unknown school, because that really is an issue. You know, when families aren't hearing back about their placement, and then, you know, I know we're going to have a report later that shows how many students have been diverted to out of catchment. But I was just wondering, what can we do to ensure, if anything, that childcare spots are reserved for the number of impending French immersion?
So through the chair, I'm going to turn it over to Exec Superintendent Strangway.
Through the chair to Trustee Dawson, except for our TDSB extended day program, childcares are all independent third-party operators, so they determine registration and wait lists. We don't have input into those processes.
Okay, thanks. A supplementary question through the chair. Could we not work with them to offer the suggestion that they reserve some of those spots? Like, are we at all providing that feedback?
Through the chair, we, Associate Director Salmon and I can certainly bring it up at the earlier CAC as a suggestion, and we can report back to you.
Okay, thank you. Question for the chairs. I was wondering how diverse the makeup of FSLAC is in terms of your membership.
So we were thinking of taking a picture of our committee last night, but we got sidetracked with a whole bunch of other things. I know it would be, because not everybody can come here because 4:30 is early, and some people have to pick up their kids, and we have members that are all over TDSB, which is a big area to cover. So I just wanted to say that we're very proud to be able to say that we have some good representation across the city at several different wards from a variety of different backgrounds. So that is really great because we get some wonderful perspective and feedback from that. Maybe I'll take a picture. I can send you of our little great little committee. And just as a sidebar with regards to childcare, if they could reserve a seat, that's amazing. But even if they could simply be considered part of that school, I think one of the biggest challenges that one of the challenges that also can sometimes come is that for a student to be able to get childcare within a specific before and after care program, they have to be part of that school. Some students from outside of that catchment can apply and get into that school under English and just the way that it sort of works. So that if you wanted to go to another school, you can apply. So there's this giant whole opportunity for some parents to be able to go to another school and say, I want to go here, and there's childcare here, but I can't get childcare here, so there we go, I'm in, la 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 la. Whereas the French immersion student has no other option. This is the only school that they are being aligned with. There's no other option to be able to go, okay, there's no before and after care school here or place, but there is over here. It doesn't matter. This is your school. So I think that they should be treated as a TDSB student that belongs to the school now. They're part of that community and therefore should be considered as part of that community as opposed to being pushed on the sidelines where someone who's not part of the community but decides just to kind of slink right into the school. Like and I get it, everybody's looking for childcare and it's an important piece, but the English student has a homeschool and they do have they could potentially get before and after care there. The French immersion student, this could make or break the decision of whether they're going to pursue this program if they can't actually access that before and after care. And they have no other option. So I guess all we're asking is that we be considered, that they be considered. And it's a small number. I mean, there's still a number out there, but it came back from the French review. Only 12% of the parents were able to and pleased with the before and after care programs that they were able to access. And that is a barrier that we need to address. And again, like I said, we're not necessarily looking to be pushing out other people, but we do want the FSL students to be considered part of that home school so that they would get that spot preferentially to someone outside who's just like, oh, I'm just going to walk right in tomorrow and get a spot, which is a bit of a challenge for the other families.
Thank you very much for that feedback. Greatly appreciated and very happy to hear that you have diverse representation on the committee. So thank you again.
Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions online? I see a hand up. Whose hand is that? Trustee King.
Thank you through you, Chair. A couple of comments and questions for the co-chairs as well. Thank you for taking the time to come down and to walk us through the report. I think it's very clear that your committee's been doing some very, very important work and you've raised some really key issues that I think we'll continue to explore. I just wanted to understand a little bit more about how your committee works, and I'm also curious about your point around the awareness of the new JK entry point. So first, I just wanted to understand, I know that your committee is comprised of parents. Do you also have organizational members on your committee that have branches into kind of that pre-K realm?
Oh, no, I don't believe we have anybody from. So we have invited early on. They have come to our community and spoken a few times, and I've actually gone to their CAC meetings as well because we've discussed these types of concerns with regards to that. We, and I'm sure Angela and Kirsten, we reach out to them to communicate as well. But I think as everybody can understand, not everybody is within the TDSB umbrella until they really are, right? So if they're finding, they might have other areas for them to be finding either daycare or their relatives that are looking after their little ones. Because right now, in order to get into the JK, you have to apply in November of the previous year. So your child is still 3, right? So you have to, first of all, you have to know that the application process is limited to 4 weeks, and it happens way before TDSB starts promoting the registration for JK, which is often in February, which is great. However, it looks like you have an opportunity to wait until the February of that year to be able to do that. So a lot of parents then only realize that they might have missed it. And there's certainly the first year of the JKSK, there was a lot of parents that contacted me, and I'm assuming possibly you. I mean, I have no power on this one, but if they're contacting me, then they're probably also contacting you about when did this change happen? Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely support it. The earlier that you can get started on these languages is amazing. See the blending of a 4-year-old who can who can sing a song and tell you the days of the week. It's amazing. But we need to be able to make sure that the parents are hearing about it. Like I said, the longer the program goes, the more that will be communicated at parks and everywhere else, like from word of mouth within that. But being able to effectively come up with communication strategies to be able to reach those parents who aren't quite at TDSB yet is going to be a key element, I think, in the next year or two to ensure that we get an uplift on enrollment. Because the enrollment between JK and SK, so SK would already have been predictive, parents knew, and JK was about a 15%, which is not a bad thing. It's good, but there were a lot of parents who were very disappointed because their next entry is only Middle French Immersion, and Middle French Immersion is probably not close to their home school. So, and if you have siblings, that turns into another, right? Because you'll get into where your elder sibling is. So if the younger one gets in, you're not guaranteed a spot. So the challenge is there.
Thank you for that. So if I'm understanding correctly, you add a lot in terms of just insight into the issue, but you're really relying on TDSB, the system, to be able to branch out and do that communication. That's not.
So we asked them what they've done. They gave us an update yesterday on some of the challenges they had last year, some of the things that they're doing differently, which was wonderful. So we had someone from the communication team discuss that. As FSLAC, we send out all of those notices through our e-newsletter. We communicate that, so the e-newsletter that comes out. We also have our email list that we can communicate. So we use a lot of our sources as well, as much as all of the ward reps can also communicate and do that within their wards and do that if they can get a ward meeting, or making sure that the trustees are including it in the methods in which they communicate, whether it's a newsletter or if it's a coffee, tea, etc. So those things do come up. So we make sure that we're trying to touch as many points as we can. I think we just need to be mindful of how we best approach that, just to get the word out. And then, because then we can deal with any questions that parents might have, right? And just kind of paint them a picture of what French immersion programs can look like and have evolved over the last few years.
Thank you. I have one last question. I'll ask the co-chairs, and then it might be a question for staff as well. But I'm just wondering if you ever have the opportunity to interact with the Black Student Achievement Advisory Committee or the Urban Indigenous Education, just in terms of some of the issues that you've brought up that touch on childcare, transportation. Do you get an opportunity to look at these from different viewpoints?
So one of the things that the PCEO does is that they coordinate, I don't know if you knew this, anyway, they try to coordinate 3 times a year that we get together, like all the CACs together, so that we can talk about whatever challenges are going on in our CACs, things, tips and traps of what some of the CACs are doing. And some of the CACs are different, right? Like there's certain ones that are apparent, like the alternative schools, the French as a second language, the other one. Then you also have the community use of schools, which is sort of a different conversation, but they can bring their voice to that table as well. So we interact with them that way. A few years ago, I made sure I went to all of the CAC meetings just to get a sense of how they also progress and what concerns that they were bringing to the table. We've also had conversations where, and childcare is one of them, where there's certain areas where the French as a second language community could bring that up as a recommendation or something along the line, supported by other CACs, or another CAC could bring up a concern that they have that is also supported by, because it's not necessarily specific to French, it could be across the entire TDSB. And in some cases, so we try to work together to identify areas that make sense for us to connect, so that it's more of a TDSB-wide perspective, which a concern that might come up that we might be able to address. And even if it might not be, before and after care might not specifically be driven by the French, it might be driven by another group, we can support it, and eventually it will probably, we hope, feed its way into where and support the concerns that we have on a more specific level, if that makes sense. Like if you can solve some of the barriers that are happening across, it will eventually percolate to the other groups as well.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Were there any other questions in the room or online? Okay, seeing none. Trustee Hastings, is that hand up online for this, or was
You
that a
noticed.
legacy hand?
Just wondering. Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you for coming down. Thank you for allowing us to hear what it is that your problem is. And you do have a problem. And it's not a problem, it's minuscule. Through you, Madam Chair, I'm just wondering, I don't know how, it's a complicated issue. I'm just wondering, because I have other things that meld into other ways, school buses, daycare. What do you do, what do we do, if I can, through you, Madam Chair, when we have other siblings that are in the system that require the same service? They require either daycare, or they require transportation or French immersion. What do we do with that? Through you, Madam Chair.
This sounds, did the delegates want to speak to this? This sounds something that maybe staff could comment on.
Through the chair, I'm going to say that it depends on the different programs, the procedures around that. We're happy to, if it's around transportation, we're happy to have the transportation folks provide trustees with information around what transpires. But I don't want to make any specific comment because the programs are different. Therefore, the actual specifics may be unique to individual cases. Thank you.
Thank you. Were there any further questions? Trustees in the room, trustees online? Okay, seeing none, I just want to again thank the delegates. We very much appreciate your coming here, providing your feedback and input to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. If you wanted to, on agenda or page 28, there's some additional detail on the transportation numbers, if that's something you'd like to dive into for some further information. But thank you so much for your help and for your time. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Have a good evening. So we're going to move on in the agenda. The next item, for receipt, excuse me. So I need a motion, a mover and a seconder for receipt of the annual report of French as a second language. Moved by Trustee Rajwani, seconded by Trustee Dawson. All in favor? Show of hands.
Aye.
Trustee Shan. Any opposed? And that passes. So we're going to move on to staff reports. The next item is the annual enrollment in early and middle French immersion programs, 2023-24, and core French programs, 2022-2023. Can we have staff speak to this?
Thank you, and through the chair. The annual report on early and middle French immersion and core French programs represents the board's. In this particular report, we speak about the actual numbers with respect to the enrollment in these programs. One of the things that we know based on the data that's in front of you is it speaks to the board's commitment to ensuring accessibility within our French programming, particularly in historically underrepresented communities. I'm going to ask on centrally assigned Principal Angela Kakamo in order to speak to this particular report. Angela?
Thank you. Good evening, and through the chair. Before you is the annual enrollment report for French language programs in the Toronto District School Board. The report outlines for you the application and placement numbers for the two centrally managed system-wide programs, those being early French immersion and the middle French immersion. For the September 2023-24 school year, the Early French Immersion Program hosted its second year of the junior kindergarten entry point to French immersion. Moreover, 3 additional new sites, that being Graysdale, Kingsview Village, and Whitehaven, have opened to host the Early French Immersion Program, bringing the site total to 77 across the system. These sites have helped to improve equity of access and to reduce student commutes in underserved areas. I'm also happy to report that just in its second year of the junior kindergarten entry, the proportion of the total potential applicant pool has remained stable. The number of JK applicants in 2023 is higher than the number of JK applicants in 2022. The report also speaks to the second system-wide entry point. The Middle French Immersion Program begins in grade 4 and is currently hosted at 40 sites across the board. To note, we are also on an upward trend with application numbers in Middle French Immersion Program across the system. Outlined as well are the system enrollment numbers for Core French Program grades 4 through grade 12. As you're already aware, Core French is mandatory in Ontario from grades 4 to 8, with 1 mandatory credit completed in secondary and usually taken in grade 9. The Appendix A attached to this report begins on agenda page 19 and offers a detailed summary of the system-wide entry points, that is the Early French and Middle French programs, providing the numbers of applicants, number of accepted placements, number of siblings, and number of feeder schools for each of the sites offering French language programs. In cases where the number of applicants in a given area was greater than the number of allotted program spaces in a school, redirection was the process by which applicants were accommodated. You will note this information in the appendix on the far right column as a fraction. The denominator indicates the number of students who were redirected in another school, and the numerator indicates the number of students who accepted placement through redirection. For September 2023, more than 99% of students were accommodated in the French immersion school associated with their home address. That is the expected program site. To note, the number of accepted placements captured in this report may change between the time of placement and the start of the school year, as parents make different decisions. On agenda page 26, there is an overall information on core French enrollment, grade 4 to grade 12. I thank you once again, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you for that. So I have Trustee Dawson.
Thank you so much, and through the chair. I was wondering, do we have information about the year-over-year enrollment comparison when we did the switch from JK to SK application? So what's the difference in the JK numbers versus the SK enrollment numbers?
Through the chair, essentially signed Principal Kakamo.
We do have those numbers, and across the system, they have remained stable and they're slightly higher at this time. I can say and report that the proportion of those numbers are slightly higher this year. Of course, we're just in our second year, and so the percentage is slightly higher between the JK for this year and the JK for last year. As you can note in the enrollment report itself, at the bottom of, just give me one second, agenda page 23, you can see the number of applications, but we can certainly provide in Trustee Weekly if you would prefer a breakdown between 22 and 23.
So what I more wanted to see the difference between was not the JK, the 2 JK entry point years, but what is the difference between the JK entry point first year versus the year prior that was only the SK entry point?
Sorry, could you repeat that question, Trustee Dawson?
Sure. What is the difference in enrollment numbers or percentages between when the application process was in SK versus when it was in JK? So if JK started 2022, what was it in 2021 and prior?
So I have the information.
Numbers is fine, not percentages.
Okay. The numbers for JKFI in 2022 was 2,667, as opposed to SKFI 2,865 for the SK 2021. Just recalling that we did have a double cohort year in 2022, but that was the difference. We have since, in our second year, we are now at 3,048 for the second year of JKFI.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know.
You're welcome.
I'm looking at, so Appendix A, where you have the list of all of the schools, and two of my schools have had a significant amount of students redirected. So taking Carleton Village as an example, 38 students went to George Syme, and George Syme does not have childcare. So do we track how many people do not take their assignment based on a lack of childcare? Do we collect data like that?
Through the chair, we do have the number of families who do not accept placement, and you'll see that in the column. I don't have information as to why families would not accept it, because they make different decisions based on various factors. Childcare may be one of them, but I do not have information as to multiple factors that may lead to their decision making.
Okay, thank you. So what kind of due diligence do we do, if any, to ensure that the schools students are being redirected to actually do have childcare?
So through the chair, I'll pass it over to Ms. Kakamo, but I do not believe that that is one of the things that we do. Ms. Kakamo?
Thank you, and through the chair. So placement in French is not based on enrollment in childcare. We do placement in French based on all eligible on-time applicants. So we do provide a spot based on a program, not a particular school, but it is not predicated on childcare enrollment.
So I didn't mean childcare enrollment. I think you're thinking that if a student already has a place in the childcare, that they then would have entry to that school. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, how does it happen that 38 students are redirected from Carleton Village to George Syme, but no childcare exists at George Syme?
So I can appreciate your question through the chair. Again, placement is based on your current address, and we understand that if families do accept placement, we'd also provide information on childcare. And as enrollment grows, then that can also spark childcare for before and after school.
Through the chair, I believe that Director Russell Rollins would also like to comment on this.
Okay, thank you.
Director?
Thank you very much. Through the chair, the Toronto District School Board has limited control over where childcare programs are placed, particularly before and after school programs. On an annual basis, where there are families that are interested in before and after school programs, there is a survey that is completed. I believe a number of years ago, we tried to align when placements offers went out to families interested in French immersion and that survey period. There are two challenges that families experience. A, the on-site provider has no more space in their program and they're unable to expand. Or B, there are an insufficient number of families who confirm that they are interested in childcare And so no program is initiated there. Then I guess the last would be if we're not able to find a provider that is able to scale up their operations and open a new program.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I was wondering if you could explain that redirection column a bit more. Like I'm looking at, I'm sorry, I don't understand it. It says 38 to George Syme, but then it says 2/9 Carleton Village, 2/3 Dennis, 2/. What does it mean when you say 2/9, 2/3, 2/2? What can you?
Certainly, and thank you for that question, Trustee Dawson. So the French immersion catchment for Carleton Village is made up of, it's the criteria for selecting the redirection. So they're made up of an English catchment. So as you can see, all of those schools those were the families. So that made up the redirection. So Carleton Village, in and of itself, those families were redirected. 2 of those 9 who were redirected would have accepted the placement to George Syme. So in total, 38 offers were made of redirection from the Carleton Village. So Dennis would have been 3 redirections. 2 of the 3 redirections would have been made. So Cordella as well. So the Cordella English catchment within French immersion for Carleton Village would have been made to George Syme.
So just, Ms. Kakumo, what percentage that you outlined earlier that were redirected in this past year of our students?
It's less than 1%.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I can appreciate that it's less than 1%. However, it's quite heavy in my ward. So that's the reason for all of my questions. How does the acceptance rate when students are redirected compare to the acceptance rate overall?
Thank you for that question. So the acceptance rate this year is comparable to other years. It was 53%.
But what is it for students who are redirected?
That's what it was, 59 out of the 112 accepted redirection. It was 53%.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Those are all my questions. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Trustee King.
Thank you through you, Chair, and thank you, staff, as well for the report. I am looking at page 2 of the report, the section on enrollment, and have a question there. It looks like, if I'm doing my math correctly, the acceptance on the JK entry is much higher than the middle entry point. So I understand from your response to the previous question that we don't necessarily investigate why why placements aren't accepted. But I'm wondering if this is information that staff are interested in soliciting in future, and if there's a mechanism in place to be able to do that and evaluate that at this time.
Ms. Kakumo?
So thank you for the question. It is an optional program that families make different decisions for. It is something that we can look into for sure, but between the offer of placement and the start of the new school year, families do make different decisions for their family to entertain either early or middle French immersion. And so at any point between the offer of placement and the entry of the new school year, they may make a different decision. And so we can notice that there's a big period of time where families can make that decision. It's not only at the offer of placement, it's a long period of time where they can make that decision to make the change in entering the program. But we can certainly look into that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think any information that we continue to garner to inform, just being able to see where trends are going and how we respond is always helpful. And to that point, I also have a business arising motion, but I will wait and see if there's further discussion and comments from other colleagues first.
Thank you, Trustee King. Were there any other questions from trustees, either in the room or online? Any further?
Trustee Earhart had questions.
Okay, Trustee Earhart, go ahead.
I see Trustee Rajagul-Singham maybe had a question prior to me, however. Through the chair, I believe Trustee Rajagul-Singham may have had a question prior. My apologies.
In the chat.
Thank you. Yes, I did, Chair. Thanks, Trustee Hart.
Okay, go ahead, Trustee Rajagul-Singham.
Thank you through the chair, and thank you to essentially assigned Principal Kakamo for this report. I know it's been a long journey to get here, so I want to thank the entire department and all staff for their work on this. I'm happy to hear that the numbers for the new sites are, for the JK sites, are increasing. I just wanted to hear staff's thoughts on comparing it to opening up a JK site prior to COVID and now these sites now comparatively, are they growing at the same pace or are we still seeing a delay? I know you mentioned that there is an increase, but I'm just wondering if COVID had an impact on that and what other factors contributed.
Thank you. And through the chair, Ms. Kakamo.
So thank you for that question, Trustee Rajagul-Singham. I do appreciate that. I think that the pandemic, of course, had an impact on many things. As you can appreciate, and the Board of Trustees can appreciate, we did transition to the Middle French immersion right during the height of the pandemic, right at the beginning, and also transition to the JK entry right at the middle of the pandemic. And so there are mitigating factors to various family decisions through any of that. I think you can appreciate we also had different modalities of learning through that. And so like anything, there was enrollment pressures at the Toronto District School Board. And so with any program implementation, various families made different decisions that benefited them through all of that. And so in the second year of implementation, just for the JK entry point, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think we are just seeing the effects of that transition, and we are very proud to see that the application numbers, even with the pre-JK students and that information with our communications plan, working with multiple stakeholders and various community partners, is getting out there. I know there's lots of work that we are doing to make sure that we are culturally responsive in different ways through our communities, and the numbers are showing that in various ways. And so I can appreciate your question, and we continue to work to improve and make changes to ensure that the information is out there. So I hope that's answered your question.
Through the chair, also wondering, in future updates, can we see a column on students leaving the program? I know oftentimes we do have students that, for whatever reason, may believe that this program's not for them and they leave. And are we able to hear information on choices? So we heard about transportation, we heard about childcare. Maybe it's not as an accessible option for them. Maybe the program doesn't have the right supports to help them in their learning. But are we able to get future data on number of students leaving the program and for what reasons?
So thank you for that. That is on our list of priorities as well, to take a look at some sort of exit survey as to why families in French programs make a decision to leave and for whatever reason. What I can say is that we've worked very hard to change the narrative in different places and spaces and to remove barriers. And that was one of the indicators in the research that we did during the French review to move the entry point to JK, to remove the preconceived notions, but also to meet the multi-year strategic plans and goals to ensure equitable access for our youngest of learners and meet those goals. So thank you for that. It's on our work plan to take a look at and work through. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. And through the chair, the final question is always a question that I always ask about, and we've chatted a lot about as well. I'm just comparing an existing site, Brimwood, and one of the new sites, Whitehaven, and the applicant numbers is fairly, they're quite almost very similar. I think it's 19 and 17. So obviously in my mind, the first thing that I think of is the major language barrier in my community. So I'm just wondering, what is our communication plan when it comes to French immersion? Are we only talking about the importance of French with these new sites, or is this something that we can maybe share with a wider group so that we continue to build that interest? I have this site. I'm just really nervous about losing it because on our side, we're not doing the right work to engage with communities to get the word out about the importance of French as a second language, the benefits of it, to really build that interest and build confidence in parents and caregivers that learning additional languages is always something that will build their confidence and is a good thing, and that their kids will be able to grasp both languages. So again, just that communication plan, please.
So thank you, and I'm excited you asked that question because we continue to evolve and work on our comprehensive communication plan. I know that you and I and several other trustees in the area have talked many times about working on culturally responsive ways to approach and target certain areas, and we're doing that. So on top of working with a dedicated communications officer, we have various tactics and varied our ways. Of course, we're going into our third year of application, so we've had two. I know 1 year was a transition year, but we are adding to those tactics and looking at various ways through our social media plan, but also our plan in publications. But what I can say is we've added our community partners in strategic areas of Scarborough and the Northwest to make sure that we are communicating in the language of those areas, but also meeting with the local school principals of the particular schools with lower application numbers. As I mentioned before, building strong partnerships with those local school communities is really important, and who better to reach out is to those principals who know those communities partners best, and making sure that we are harnessing the relationships that they've already built. And of course, working with the Parent and Community Engagement Office, we have built a relationship with them. I know that Michelle's online, but I've emailed her already to work with the community support workers. We can appreciate also the relationship that I've built through the years with the trustees. I know in Trustee Weekly, we have sent out already 2 communications, and we would appreciate any support that you have in your local communities and welcome any relationships that you've built as well. And through that, we've also worked with the Center of Excellence for Black Student Achievement. I know that we've communicated with their communication officer to reach out to any community partners as well. So we continue to evolve in different ways and in different places to ensure that we are doing our due diligence and ensuring that additional language learning, because we know literacy skills do transfer to additional language learning. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. And final question to the chair. I know in the past with French reports, we do get demographic data. I was hoping that the next time we see the JK entry points and information and an update around that, we can kind of get the demographic data to see how folks learning a second language are keeping up, what the interest level looks amongst them, because I think any information would be really helpful. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Reggie-Kulasingam. So we're going to Trustee King. Oh, excuse me, Trustee Earhart.
Thanks very much. Through the chair. I had some questions I wanted to ask, and many of them were asked already, and so just thanks very much to everybody for the thoughtful questions and thoughtful responses. One that I don't think I got clarity on that I wanted to ask was around the JK enrollment being in the November timeframe for the French immersion entry, and the broader JK enrollment being rolling but really being targeted in February. And if there's been, and this was not being a trustee as part of the French review, if there's been thoughts to merging those to be a common recruitment and time frame, and why that wasn't done in the first place, or if there's thoughts moving forward to do that. And so I'd really welcome staff comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair. Yes, there has been thoughts. We met as small groups about a year and a half ago in order to look at the fact that primary kindergarten registration begins the month of February, whereas the French immersion kindergarten registration begins in November. And so staff is looking at how we better align that particular process so that we just have kindergarten registration for both French immersion and also for the traditional kindergarten program. What we're looking at, and the committee's actually meeting, I believe, next Tuesday as a starting point, although we met about a year and a half ago. Part of the challenge was around the fact that when we moved to the JK entry for French immersion, that represented one significant system change, and so we didn't want to have two major system changes all rolled up into one. So it is something that staff is looking at this point in time in order to see whether or not that is a better option or better way for us as a board to go. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And then I had another question that I had a question about Blake, which I'll ask in just a moment. I did also want to ask, and I didn't flag this question, but in the report, I wanted to just flag a better understanding around the COVID pandemic and students that may have transferred out of French, particularly in those first year cohorts. As a backdrop to that, I'm a parent of a child who's now in grade 3. And so we started French immersion during the pandemic virtually, and we did drop out of French simply due to barriers with accessing the content in the virtual learning environment. I've heard anecdotally that happened with several other families as well. Just wondering if we have any system information at this point, or if this is something we're tracking. And if it was in the report, I apologize if I missed it. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to turn it over to Subject Assigned Principal Kakamo.
So thank you, and through the chair and to Trustee Earhart. It's not in this report. All I can say at this point is that, yes, we did have French immersion during the first year of the pandemic through the virtual schools. I can only speak anecdotally, as I do not recall that there was it embedded in any report that there were families who may have chosen differently and not to learn during those modalities during French or be in French immersion, but I do not have that system data with me at this time.
Okay, thanks very much. I think that would be something I would be interested in over time, is particularly those 2 years and those that enrolled and over time actively withdrew, just when we had 1 to 2 years very active virtual environments, as well as unstable in-school attendance for those first years of French learning. And so thank you, and that is something I would be interested in over time. The other question I had was around the loss of model school status and Blake's school. As you know, my community, the community I represent, they continue to ask around what happens when French immersion programs move into traditionally underserved communities and the equity impacts of those decisions. And so I know it was referenced earlier tonight the article in the Globe and Mail. And specifically in that article, there was a chart that seemed to show that French immersion is taking over the school, from grabbing people from out of catchment. That's my understanding of the dynamic that's being presented. I'm just wondering if staff are willing to comment on that dynamic, in particular at Lake School, what the data is showing at Lake School, and just any response to the article. And thank you very much.
So through the chair, I'm going to ask Dr. Cameron if he's on the line to speak to that particular question.
Through the chair, thanks for the question, Trustee Earhart. Yeah, the data shows for Blake School and many schools that drop out of the model schools program, roughly every 3-year calculation, between 14 and 18 schools drop out for high social mobility issues. But the data shows that year on year, since the French immersion program began around 2013-14 at Blake School, that they've increased in enrollment in the French immersion program by about 10% and decreased in enrollment in the mainstream program by about 10%. Right now, it's about 50-50. And that has coincided with their movement in LOI in terms of student demographics with students that have higher socio and economic challenges or have decreased in enrollment in Blake School. It's been in line with the French immersion program. So it's not really the French immersion program per se, it's the student population in Blake School that's been changing. It just happens to be associated with the French immersion program.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron. I'm not sure if Subject Assigned Principal Kakmo would also like to speak on this.
Thank you, and through the chair. The only comment I can make is that I can say that between 2014, when the program began at Blake, there have only been 2 redirections in the last few years, and the redirections have been mostly from schools in the lower LOI, and therefore most of the students who are attending Blake from French immersion are from the Blake English catchment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And so if I understand correctly, and I may just be repeating what you said, and I appreciate it. I believe what I just heard was that the students that are attending Blake in either French or English, that the change has largely been those from the Blake catchment. And so perhaps we could say those students weren't going into Blake prior to the availability of French immersion, but they are from the catchment largely. And therefore, like, the dynamic of the LOI change is related to changes of who is living within the catchment as much as, and who's now choosing to attend Blake School from within the catchment, and not those from other catchments coming into the catchment to attend French. Did I understand that correctly? And thank you very much.
Through the chair, that is what, that's the understanding. Yes, you're correct.
Okay, thank you very much. I may have to rewatch this video to take that all in, but I want to thank everyone very much for their time on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Laskin.
Through you, Madam Chair. I probably know this, but it's simply a blank. Can you help me understand, through you, Madam Chair, to staff, why does the application for JK immersion have to be in November and mid-immersion is January, February, at the time that the regular registration for school is? I'm not sure I actually understand that.
Through the chair, and thank you for the question. I'm going to ask Central Principal Kakmo to speak to it, but at the heart of it is that we have a policy as one of the only school boards in the province that outlines the expectation around guaranteed placement, and in ensuring guaranteed placement for students who apply within the timeframe for French immersion programming. What's taking place is we need an opportunity or the time necessary in order to go about and do the actual placement of students into those particular programs. I'm going to ask Ms. Kakamo to speak more to it in more greater detail.
So thank you, and through the chair and to Trustee Laskin, I appreciate that question. And Associate Director Salmon has already mentioned quite a few of the implications of the early French immersion application process happening in November. Our procedure at this time does guarantee placement. So currently the application process in November guarantees placement for all eligible on-time applicants, and therefore we have a deadline to apply to meet the demands for the multiple applications that come in the November period. As you can appreciate, we have a staffing process, and unlike the English kindergarten in an English language board, which is what we provide to all students, the French immersion program is optional, and we are subject to what we would call enrollment pressures at schools, capacity or utilization. We are hosted at a school, and therefore, as we look year to year and do our planning, we need to ensure that there is space to host that program, and we need to complete that process each year to ensure that it is staffed accordingly for the following year. With middle French immersion, as you can see in the enrollment report, there are less applicants. And so we do have guaranteed placement for middle French as well, but we are able to facilitate that process much quicker, and there are fewer redirections required. There are also fewer programs across the system. I hope that I've been able to answer that question, Trustee Laskin.
I do understand the compounding issues on the one hand, but I don't on a practical purpose, because unless you know how many kids are enrolling in JK English Stream 2, from a space potential, you know, like if it's within the same catchment, you're not clear how many are doing French, how many are doing English. They're at different time periods. So to Associate Director Salmon made a comment earlier when we first discussed this issue. I certainly was under the impression we were adjusting the registration process for English to be at the same time, so parents were not confused. And now we're into the second cycle of that, and you're telling us you're just beginning to discuss it, you're meeting to discuss it. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about, yet again, parents are going to come to us in February and say they had no idea that they could apply in November, and it's too late for that. And then we tell them they have to wait now then until grade 4. So I think just practically, you know, I don't know if it's a resourcing issue that could go into our budget conversation. But just from a logical, practical perspective, the JK registration for French immersion or regular programming needs to be at the same time, in my opinion, as a parent, especially if you have no other kids in the system, because you just aren't aware. And it's still new, right? So how do we make it simple for parents, especially because it's still new, as opposed to disappointing a number of parents still who have really no experience with the public education system until, you know, they really start to think about it. Oh, my child's, you know, going to be 4 in 2024. They're eligible for school, right? November, many aren't thinking that, because especially if they have December birthdays, they're just not clued in enough. So anyway, I guess I'm asking through you, Madam Chair, to staff, if you could come back to, obviously, I guess we're too late for this year, but we have to get this together for next year, in my opinion. I think it's really harmful from a public relations perspective. And I understand that French immersion is an optional program and that our obligation is to the English system. But if we have French immersion and we're offering French immersion and we're trying our best to make it, to remove the barriers of accessibility and, increase to the potential that we can. Anyway, I'm rambling a bit, but is the issue then that we're guaranteeing the space? If we remove that, I'm not saying I support this, so please don't faint. But if we removed that sentence that everybody's guaranteed a space, then can both application processes happen in February? I'm wondering if staff has thought about that too. Anyway, I'm just rambling and my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a comment or response?
Yes, and through the chair, thank you for the question. And I think the points you've made are valid. I think that with respect to the latter part that you've outlined around, if we were to remove that one particular line, would we be in a better position in order to be able to align all of the staffing concerns and also with the regular kindergarten registration and do them all in February? I believe that Ms. Kakamo has a response to that particular question. But from the perspective of when did we start this? As I outlined, we started this conversation about 1.5 years ago with the centrally assigned principal for French, with the early years centrally assigned principal, and a committee that we know we want to get there. Alignment is important for our parents, important for our communities, and that's where we want to get to. Partly right now, what we're trying to work on and will be working on is how we go about doing that, because there are many moving parts, and it's a really, really important part of this process to when individuals are starting kindergarten. So it's how we get there to the alignment. It's not if we get there, it's how we get there. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, but it's also when we get there. Sorry.
Yes, without a doubt. And so, and I don't want to say specific, but we know that we can't do that for this year, but that's part of what our goal is going to be, to do it as expeditiously as possible for all of our parents and communities. I'm going to turn it over to centrally assigned Principal Kakamo in order to respond to that, because this was an earlier conversation that we have had. Ms. Kakamo?
So thank you, Associate Director Salmon, and thank you, Trustee Laskin. I certainly can appreciate your frustration, and I can share with you that I concur with Associate Director Salmon. These conversations have been ongoing for quite a while with the Early Years Department and centrally assigned Principal Teodesiu, and System Superintendent Strangway, and the predecessor as well, centrally assigned Principal Poulis. These conversations have been ongoing for quite a while to do the alignment between the kindergarten registration and the early French immersion. As you have mentioned, and I don't want to bring on anxiety for anyone, staff has looked at the procedure, and the guaranteed placement is challenging with the early French immersion. We do have to recognize that early French immersion is an application process for those who are interested, and it's not for everyone. And it is the indicator that stalls some of our conversations. When it comes to alignment. Also, the management process for our application has not changed, but yet we are waiting also to transition into Power School. We need to be on the same management system. And we are not yet there. We are on pars, as you can appreciate, and we all need to be on the same management system to be able to also do the alignment piece. And we continue to work through those processes, and you can appreciate those are also things that we want to do and do well, so we don't compromise any of the forward-facing materials that need to be done and done well for our families and our relationships with families when they are applying to French immersion. And the other thing is that French immersion is space limited, whereas the regular kindergarten is not for that. So those are the three items. And I repeat, I do share the frustrations, but we are in those conversations and will continue to do so, as those are the priorities of our department, as they are for the early years as well for alignment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair, just to staff, thank you very much. And maybe could we get an update on how those conversations are going? Maybe, February, March, so we don't wait until we're too close to that November again for next year. I know I personally would appreciate that.
Through the chair, we're pleased to bring back information in the months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin, and thank you to staff for those responses. So I think, are there any further questions in the room or online? Trustee Chernos-Lynn.
Thank you. I had my name on the chat before when I was virtual, but I'm very glad to be here in person now. I want to thank all the hard work that's gone into implementing the French review. I think one of the things we really can tell from this annual report is that those decisions made back in 2019 have really, we can see them coming to fruition, and that's an exciting thing. So that's the first thing I want to say, because I think, we talked a lot about equity of access. We're seeing that happening, and there's still perhaps tweaks to be done and to figure out, are we doing it, is it working, and understanding the demographics in our schools, and making sure each year we're doing it better and better and better to reach new families and families who might not have been represented before, and breaking down the barriers in terms of understanding the pedagogical pedagogical reasons for early immersion, even for kids who might not have English as a first language. So I know that's something that staff has really been working on when they go out into communities to talk about the new programs that are opening, and to answer questions that parents have about that. And I think that's really helpful. So one of the things I just wanted to highlight, and this is really just more of when I see the work that FSLEC has done, and when I see the work that Angela and Kirsten and their team have done over the past, well, it's now 4 years really, since 2019. So it's almost 4 years of work to get this French review implemented. We're actually seeing these come to life. And a few weeks ago, I received a really wonderful email from a teacher at Thorncliffe Park Public School. And it's the first, just for people to understand, kids from Thorncliffe Park had been bused to so many different schools over the years because they were always, first they were being sent to Northleigh, which wasn't too far by bus, but then that program was full, so they'd be sent to Davisville, which was further, and then Davisville was under construction, so they were sent to Vaughan Road, which was considerably further. Then they were being bused down to Blake and to many other schools. And so families had kids, they were really, the school community was all over the place, and we had lots of buses going different places. Well, recently we opened a program at Fraser Mustard, which is the kindergarten school in Thorncliffe Park, and it has now graduated into its first year of grade 1 at Thorncliffe Park. And a teacher wrote to say how incredibly well it's going and how vibrant the program is and how well the students are doing. And I'm going to be honest, I think there was some pushback from some people who didn't know if it would take hold in that community. And I think staff have really shown us, and there was certainly advocacy for it, that this could be very successful in the area. So I just want to say, this has been, I think, it's been a lot of work, but also a labor of love for Angela and her team. And I want to thank them for that, and also a labor of love for a lot of parents, many of whom are here today. So thank you for that, because I think our community and our families are benefiting. The other thing I just wanted to mention when we're talking about alignment and the fact that staff have been talking about this for about a year and a half, the FSLAC has been talking about this for as long as I've been on FSLAC. And I think because of that, I actually think staff have been talking about it for longer. Certainly around that table, the French department staff have. There are a lot of barriers to getting it done, and challenges and things that we've been working on that are pieces that have to get put into place. But I just want to acknowledge that I think it's been longer than a year and a half. I've been here 5 years, and I've been on FSLAC for 5 years, and we've been talking about it around that table for 5 years. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Chernos-Lynn. So I think at this point, we are moving for receipt of the report, and then there's business arising.
I'm happy to move it.
So moved by Trustee Chernos-Lynn, seconded by Trustee Dawson. Are we doing it on eScribe or hands? On eScribe? Okay.
Sean in favor.
Okay, let's just wait. Trustee Hastings, how do you vote? In favor? Anything else outstanding? No. Shannon? Okay, and the receipt of the report is approved. So at this point, we have business arising from that agenda item. Trustee King?
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you, everybody. I know that we've been discussing this item for quite some time now. It's actually a discussion I've really appreciated being a part of, how we strengthen our core and our French immersion programs. I'm somebody that didn't necessarily appreciate the value of French growing up, and was one that ended my French career at grade 9. So I'm really excited to talk about how we continue to strengthen it and make sure there's an opportunity for as many students as possible. It's been really encouraging to hear that there's an upward trend in both the early and the middle entry point, and also very encouraging to hear and know that fair and equitable access continues to be a priority for everybody involved here, both staff and the advisory committee members that we heard from. So this motion, really simply put, is just asking for more information. If carried, it will have the director provide a report on the social demographics of students enrolled in our French immersion programs. So the numbers that we saw earlier today, just based on pure enrollment, are important, but we know that they don't tell the full story of who is enrolling and benefiting from these programs, and if in fact we are achieving all those important goals that have been set out and that a lot of work and time has been invested in trying to achieve. So we know that at the time of the review, it was cited that there was an overrepresentation of high-income families. We know that there was a strong interest in diversifying the enrollment, and it was specifically cited that there was an overrepresentation of, at the time, what we called Latin American students, as well as South Asian and East Asian. As far as I can tell, there was no consideration or reporting on Black students at that time. So we can see the evolution of work that's in front of us. I understand that the enrollment numbers that we looked at today, that this report wasn't specifically about demographics, but I think looking at it, it presents an opportunity nonetheless. So this is a great time for us to be considering demographic data, because we do have the completed student census from this year, and we've also heard about the timely discussion that stemmed from the Globe and Mail article that calls into question the creation of class differences and cultural divides in schools. So in that article, we heard about Blake specifically in the Toronto Danforth area, and Trustee Earhart spoke to that. I've seen a similar situation in my ward, in Ward 7, with Parkdale Junior and Senior. And I've also been able to identify about 6 other elementary schools that are dual track that have seen a change in their LOI over the last 5 years or so. I think that knowing that there's that number of schools, it's just worth pulling a thread to see what, if anything, can be learned. I don't think, I know that it doesn't serve anybody's interest to make assumptions or make uneducated decisions, and I really feel that this data will help us provide more of an evidence-based course of action, whether that course of action is determined to be the status quo, whether it's garnering some more informed research, or whether it leads to some more local level kind of considerations. So I have been able to discuss this with Dr. Cameron. I know that that he and his team are supportive of the work. And he also flagged for us that it coincides nicely with the LOI policy work that is coming in 2024. So the resolution here is that the director provide a report on the social demographics of students enrolled in French immersion programs across the TDSB in winter 2024, and that would include 3 parts. It would include a look at an overview of the representation of the socioeconomic status, racial identity, and creed as compared to the overall student population, so it just gives us a sense of who's enrolled. It provides an opportunity for analysis of the representation in those dual-track elementary schools whose LOI ranking has shifted below the 150 since 2017. And then it also provides some leeway for some further ward-level analysis of any of the above data or any additional information that's deemed beneficial as staff are going through this research process. So there's certain data metrics that we've identified and asked for, but as they delve into the work, they might find some other threads that are worth investigating, and they would have the leeway to do that. So I'll leave my remarks there, and I'm open to any comments, questions from staff or colleagues.
On this piece. Thank you, Trustee King. So that is a motion being made by Trustee King, being moved by Trustee King. Do I have a seconder before we open it up for discussion? Oh,
yeah, I'll be seconding it.
Trustee
Madam Chair.
Shan seconding.
Trustee Shan.
Was there any question? Oh, I have Trustee Laskin and then Dawson on the speakers list.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm just seeing it for the first time, so maybe some of this is reactionary, so forgive me. I say that in advance. I'm trying to understand why, I guess is my general question. Because I know that, at least in my experience from the last census, so I have no issue, if I remember correctly, and this is where I need staff to help me. We did get detailed information we have public information, a public report on the census, but we did get school by school breakdown. So in a school by school breakdown, I think it included the program breakdown. So I do think as part of the regular reporting, or what I would be expecting out of the report on the student census, would cover off the who's in the English program at the school and who's in the French program at the school through self-identified data. So I do believe that that is already part of the report. So I need staff to get back to me on that one. An analysis of the representation of dual track schools. I guess for me, the context of that is how many schools that aren't dual track have also had this change, because I know I've had a few and there's no French in them. So I'm not, I guess another question I would have is I'm not quite sure the validity of that number without the whole picture. Would be my immediate reaction. And again, forgive me, but I've just seen this for the first time. And so I do believe, and again, that I didn't take the time to quickly look up what the other was, but I think we do get the detailed school by school data. So first, I guess through you, Madam Chair, I'd like staff to answer that part first. If there's anything here that's new or different than we wouldn't have normally done.
Could we have a response from staff?
So I'm going to call on Dr. Cameron in order to comment on that.
And then
through the chair, no, we don't share school by school data, demographic data with trustees or with the public. We share ward aggregate data. Once the census goes to the board later this month, then there'll be ward aggregate data for all the wards. So you'll see it. You'll see the census at the ward level, but you won't see details like that, Trustee Laskin, at school by school level.
So there is school by school data, though. I have seen school by school data. Does it only go to principals then?
Yes, it stays in-house, internal.
Right, so it stays in-house.
It's not public data, no.
Okay, so that's the difference. This is meant to be public, but I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew I had seen that data. So there's nothing, so in this question, the issue is it's now asking that this be public, and I think that's a big concern for me. And there has been a reason, or at least I'd like to have a conversation about the reason why we've never made school by school data public before, and why all of a sudden we should be making school by school data public through this motion. I have a real problem with that, and I think it needs more analysis and more conversation. And I don't know if we'd have to go in private to have that conversation or if that's a public conversation. But that's the piece I guess I'm really concerned about, is that, because I know we have that data, so that's not new to me. But the fact that I've seen my schools, I guess somebody shared them in confidence at some time. Obviously, I've never put them in my weekly update. But there is a reason why we haven't shared that data publicly. So I don't want to inadvertently now share all that data publicly through this motion without having a very, a conversation about the rationale of why so far we've never done that. If that makes any sense to you, Madam Chair, to the movers of the motion. Thank you.
Trustee King, did you want to respond?
Through the chair, yes, happy to. And I think there was some question for staff in there as well, but I can respond. The context really is asking the question, we've implemented changes to achieve a certain goal. How do we know if we've achieved it or not? So in the context of, are we achieving what we set out to with French programming and diversifying the enrollment? If we're not looking at who's actually enrolled, how do we know how effectively we've done that? So this motion is looking for an opportunity to actually evaluate Have we expanded the enrollment? Do we have more of that diversity? And an opportunity to also look in conjunction with where we've seen changes in LOI. There are multiple reasons that could happen. Is the French impact something that we should in fact be considering and looking at? Or is it not as connected as we might be led to think? So we're really asking for the investigation into these questions to evaluate where we go from here. Whether or not it's public information is something that's a consideration I'm willing to kind of think through. But I think what I'm really looking for is that it's information that staff have available to work with and to inform future decisions, and that we're aware as well as trustees.
Does staff want to comment?
Thank you, and through the chair, excuse me. I think staff is happy to take back the privacy question. Staff is in support of the motion. However, we need to be able to look at the privacy piece of it in order to see, similar to what we do with EQAO results for individual students, we are very intentional about the approach that we take around limiting certain data sets that are so small that they may identify particular groups or individuals. So we would have to look at what that may look like in the presentation of the data as we have collected it. So that's something I would ask that staff be asked to look at how we actually present, because there may be ways in order to provide trustees with the information that you're requesting, but also maintain the level of privacy that's needed and necessary and expected. Thank you.
So again, sorry, the motion isn't up. So if this passes through committee and then board, and the public sees this, they think we're getting the report and they will have all this detailed information. So I'm concerned about raising expectations. So I'm wondering if the movers would consider adding something to this motion. So when it became, I mean, I don't have a vote here, but so when it became public as part of our board business, it didn't set up an expectation that we would have all this detail in that report. Because I still have a problem with the details in just the French program and the school-by-school analysis and comparison. Let's face it, that's what parents do and the public does. That's what they sure do to EQAO. And that has always freaked me out. Anyway, you've heard my concerns. Again, I know we have this data, so the data part, always think it's great to have data. I'm just worried about, well, I've said my piece. Thank you.
So through the chair, if trustees could refer it back to staff in order to determine a solution that respects individuals' privacy while providing trustees with the opportunity to access the data. And so I think staff needs to be able to look at that and work on that in order and come back to trustees with a solution that would meet both criteria that have been outlined. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me see, I have trustee Dawson is next on the list.
Thank you. Through the chair, I want to thank the movers for putting this motion forward. I wholeheartedly support it. I trust that staff will work through any privacy concerns as part of the exercise. I think it's, as the trustee co-chair of the Inner City Community Advisory Committee, this is something that we have been asking for a really long time as part of the LOI review. So I do think it's a timely motion, as was mentioned by Trustee King, that this tie in nicely with the LOI review, and I will be supporting this motion tonight. Thank you.
And I believe I have trustee Chernos Lynn next on the speakers list.
So my question then was just to staff through the chair. Is the suggestion then to amend the motion or simply to refer it to staff, acknowledging that there's support from the committee, like if you vote in favor, that you're referring it to staff and staff will figure out, operationally how to do this so that trustees see potentially parts of it in private, or I just want to understand what staff's recommendation is here, because the discussion shifted a little bit.
And through the chair, staff would like to have it referred back to staff in order to, with respect to how the data is presented. I think that that's the key, how the data is presented.
So I guess just my question to the chair, and perhaps Ms. Joseph Dowers can just advise procedurally how, whether there needs to be added language on that.
So at this point, I'm going to call a brief recess. So we're just going to recess, maybe 10 minutes? You can cut the feed. in our meeting. And I believe at this point, there was going to be an amendment proposed on the floor with regard to a whereas clause. Trustee Chernos-Lynn?
Yes, I'd like to move just an amendment that just above the therefore be it resolved, it says, whereas data could be as an aggregate for programs across the TDSB. And this would allow staff the flexibility to provide this to trustees in a way that would address the really significant points made by Trustee Laskin and agreed with by staff. So this is, I think, a good idea, and I hope trustees will support it. And I think I do need a seconder if there's someone that could second that amendment.
So I think there was just one important word in there, that the data could be shared as an aggregate. Just to be clear, for those voting, and that will be added in eScribe, I believe. It's there. So I need a seconder for the amendment. Trustee Hastings, all in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? Online? Do we have members voting online? Trustee Shan?
Supporting of it. Yeah.
In favor?
Yes, in favor, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So the amendment carries. The amendment carries, and we're going back to the main motion as amended. Do we need any further discussion on the main motion as amended? So we can open the vote. Are we going to do it on eScribe or just show of hands? eScribe? So it's coming up on eScribe, the motion as amended.
Shan in favor.
Chernos-Lynn in favor.
Okay, it is not coming up. I think it's coming up.
Dawson in favor.
Trustee Williams in favor.
Trustee King in favor.
Okay, it's there now. No, it's there. Do we have any outstanding votes? And that carries. Thank you so much. So we're going to go on to the next item in the agenda, the early literacy. Oh, did we move to? We already accepted that. We're going to move on to the next item, early years literacy intervention model, new Ontario curriculum language, grade 1 and 8, new grade 9 English curriculum, implementation update. Could we have staff speak to this?
Thank you, and through the chair. The report in front of you provides trustees with an update on the implementation of the new Ontario language curriculum, grades 1 to 8, and also the de-streamed new grade 9 English curriculum. It also speaks to the system supports and professional learning staff is engaging in order to address literacy across our system. It's my pleasure to have presenting this particular report, the new centrally assigned principal, Lisa Teodosa, and also Lynn Strangway, the executive superintendent for Learning Center 3.
Good evening. We don't have the slideshow. Yeah.
Starts this slide.
Thank you.
Just 1 second. There it is.
Next slide, please. Through the chair. The TDSB Early Literacy Intervention Model was created in 2019 to increase access to daily regular literacy supports for students and in-school teacher capacity building. This model of intervention is implemented in the classroom setting with a shared ownership for student learning between the classroom educators and intervention teachers. Students receive daily reading literacy instruction in schools where there has been an identified need to improve literacy achievement by the end of grade 1, or for those students struggling to read by the end of grade 3. It is an inclusive model where children remain in their classroom setting while receiving the literacy support they require. This reflects an anti-oppressive stance by honoring that children's rightful place is in their classroom environment with access to class lessons and teachings alongside their peers. The model is based on modern research about foundational literacy practices grounded in culturally relevant pedagogy that can be applied across disciplines. It is grounded in the TDSB framework for early reading, which outlines the critical components of effective early reading instruction. Next slide, please. The Early Literacy Intervention Team is comprised of several key members. The program coordinator supports 4 early literacy coaches who support 38 reading intervention teachers and 11 early reading teachers. This group of intervention teachers work in 2 schools each, alongside classroom educators in 70 schools involved in the program. Their work is done in partnership with our 4 speech and language pathologists and guided by our colleagues in equity, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and urban Indigenous education. Next slide, please. The 70 schools the team supports represent the 4 learning centers across the TDSB. With ministry funding, we were able to add 18 schools to our program this school year. Schools were selected based on various criteria as outlined on the slide. Next slide, please. In 2022, the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the OHRC, released the Right to Read Inquiry Report based on human rights issues affecting students with reading disabilities in Ontario schools. In response to the Right to Read Inquiry Report, the Ministry of Education released Effective Early Reading Instruction, a Teacher's Guide, in the spring of 2022, which provides educators with information on foundational early reading skills, an understanding of how these skills develop in young children, and examples of evidence-based instructional strategies to support students to become proficient and fluent readers. To support the implementation of the content in this ministry guide, the TDSB created a companion guide entitled Instructional Strategies to Support Teaching and Learning in Reading. This companion guide builds on the ministry guides, highlighting key strategies for both word reading and oral language skills. Next slide, please. Extending from the previous ministry reports and guides, in June of 2023, the ministry introduced the new Ontario curriculum, grade 1 to 8 language, which incorporates key recommendations from the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read report. It is centered on the belief that all children can succeed and their success in life is grounded in solid foundational literacy skills. This curriculum focuses on honoring students' identity and provides a holistic approach to learning across curricula with an emphasis on transferable skills. As to system-wide support, resources, and professional learning, we continue our commitment to ensure that foundational literacy skills are grounded in culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy and incorporate appropriate recommendations from the OHRC Right to Read report. We have done so by collaborating with renowned early years and literacy educational researchers, Dr. Carrie Ann Eskai and Dr. Alfred Tatum. Research recommendations in the OHRC report and continued assessments. Next slide, please. The TDSB has created various resources that support literacy instruction. You will find them listed on the screen. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. The expectations in the language curriculum grade 1 to 8 and grade 9 de-streamed English course are organized into 4 distinct but related strands. Strand A, literacy, connections, and applications. Strand B, foundations of language. C, the comprehension, understanding, and responding to text. And D, composition, expressing ideas and creating text. The program in all grades is designed to ensure that students build solid foundations in language and literacy, develop their analytical and critical thinking skills, and reflect on their learning. Next slide, please. Thank you. Building on the elementary language curriculum, the grade 9 English curriculum continues to provide a strong foundation in both reading and writing and emphasizes teaching these 2 different skills in an independent way. Next slide, please. When approaching the delivery of professional learning to various staffing groups, we have created learning experiences and opportunities centered on the concept of joy and honoring student identity. Our goal is to help staff develop a working understanding of the 4 strands and how they relate to one another. We are also exploring assessment and evaluation and implementing the holistic inclusion of the global competencies, STEM, library, Indigenous education, and other areas listed in the document. Next slide, please. As outlined in the report, you will find some of our key goals listed on the slide. That concludes the report, and I'll now pass it over to Associate Director Salmon.
Thank you, and through the chair, we welcome any questions about this report. Thank you.
Any questions from trustees in the room? Trustee Dawson?
Thank you. Through the chair, first of all, I want to thank staff for this report. It really was amazing to read, and I'm still learning about the right to read more and more from my constituents, and many of them have mentioned Lexia, so I was very happy to see it on there. I have a couple of questions I'm going to ask on behalf of Trustee Earhart. With the right to read, can we request a more fulsome report on what the right to read report is and how the recommendations that directly apply to the TDSB are being met? Have we ever received a report like that in the past?
So through the chair, we have not provided trustees with a report on the right to read at committee or board. What we have done is we provided in 2 separate trustee weekly updates through the course of the last year, updated information on the specific things that the board has been engaging in order to speak to the right to read, what the board has done, and some of the key areas. What we've spoken about and provided trustees information on was around professional learning for our central staff, for our principals, for our superintendents. We've also provided information with respect to some of the key resources that we are currently using in order to implement the right to read expectations. Part of the transition that we are signaling is the notion that the information that was provided in the right to read report was information that was effectively incorporated into the new grade 1 to 8 curriculum and grade 9. So that information is the ministry expectation for boards, and that's what the TDSB has been rolling out through the course of the last month or 2, although all of last year we provided in-servicing and professional learning in that area and provided access to resources. So I just want to make sure that although the right to read is a significant document with respect to direction, but where we have actually incorporated all of the factors of the right to read is actually in the curriculum document that was just recently released, and that's what the board and all boards across the province are following, and that's how we're actually implementing the right to read. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from trustees in the room or online? Trustee King?
Thank you through your chair. Just wanted to echo as well the feedback that Trustee Dawson has shared. It's the question I get so much from my community as well, is asking about updates on Right to Read. Even as I went out to a couple stakeholders just to look for insights and comments on this report, it seemed to me like there was a bit of a conflation between what TDSB and what the system is already doing in terms of early intervention and what they're doing in terms of response to the Right to Read report. I think that the comment that I heard from one of my families is that they, based on the Right to Read, they were expecting to see more about special education, for instance, in here, where we talk, I think, a lot more about our EDI efforts in terms of reading. So I appreciate that the information is shared with trustees, and it does exist in different forms, but I think getting to something that's really succinct that we can share with our families and communities that really shows like an easy comparison where they don't have to look through curriculum, but they can look and just like see a checkbox, like recommendation, here's what it looks like, here's where we are in terms of progress. I think helping us be able to communicate in that way, I think would be helpful.
Thank you. And through the chair, I definitely hear what you're outlining. It's almost the alignment, direct alignment with the Right to Read and what the board is actually doing. And so I'm going to ask Executive Superintendent Strangway in order to comment on that. Go ahead.
Through the chair, thank you for your question, Trustee King. We do have parent resources on our website that we've shared since the Right to Read was released. So it was released in March of 2022. And by early June, we had put out parent resources with a parent-friendly explanation and supports that they can utilize at home. So that's on our early years website, and it's also linked in, it's in the report. So that is one place. But I think it's really important to reiterate to your constituents that the Ministry of Education policy, which is the curriculum document, is what we implement, and the Right to Read recommendations that are appropriate for all children, and then the ones that are appropriate for children with specific learning needs, which is what the Right to Read's original intention was about. They're embedded in the curriculum, and the early years team works with special education. So for those children who need the Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports, sometimes they would go through like the IST or school support team processes and have an individual education plan, but it's not necessary. But we work with special education in acquiring resources and then working on the training for them. And one big example of that was with the rollout of the Wilson Reading, which is mostly a Tier 3 support, and it would be mostly children with special education needs in the area of reading that would access an intervention like that. I hope that helps.
Through the chair, thank you. And I do have a separate question as well. Just regarding the training, it's great to see the amount of schools and teachers that are receiving training on Empower. I'm just wondering, do we have targets around that? Like, what does that look like in terms of our expectations and how we roll out and progress that over time?
So through the chair, I'm going to ask Strangway, or actually Ms. Teodosa, to speak to that with respect to, we actually do not have targets. Our target has actually been to ensure, A, that all of those educators within our system are represented and receive the training, that our administrators receive the training, and that our central staff, including coaches and other staff that are providing central leadership and support, also are trained. So we've actually gone through in all three areas and provided specific training for each of those groups of staff such that they are able to better implement the actual expectations of the new curriculum, and that's aligned with the Right to Read. Ms. Teodosa, do you want to speak to some of that training that has actually taken place at various places?
Thank you. Through the chair, We have already rolled out professional learning for our central staff, as Associate Director Salmon mentioned. So that was a two-day rollout, so a series of 2 days where all of our leaders were trained to understand the curriculum format. It is new, and then engaged in activities and opportunities to discuss how that might impact their work as they move through our schools and school system. We have also begun a 3-part series for our administrators, and we have offered several sessions of part 1 and have now moved on to part 2. And we are ready to roll out training for our teachers starting next week, and that will be a 4-part series where every school will be invited to elect a teacher or 2 to attend the session, and it's a train-the-trainer model.
Thank you very much for that. Director Ross-Alons would also like to comment. Ms. Director?
Thank you very much, Associate Director Salmon, through the chair. As we work towards implementing the Student Achievement Plan from the Ministry of Education, there are specific outcomes for students that the board will be accountable for. Many years ago, when we started working with the Hospital for Sick Children and other organizations that provide targeted supports to develop children's early literacy skills in alignment with the right to read, our goal was to have 1 or 2 interventions in place in every school. The staff have been doing an incredible job, given the changes that occur year over year, to continue to work towards the target of every school having multiple interventions so that they can meet the myriad of needs that exist in the school from year to year. So we will be more precise as we build our implementation plan associated with the new multi-year strategic plan and the requirements under Bill 98 to implement the Student Achievement Plan as directed by the Ministry of Education. Thank you. And great job, staff. Thank you for this report.
Thank you. Were there any further questions? Okay. So our next speaker, Trustee Arts.
Hi, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you to staff for this report. I think most of my questions were asked by other trustees. But I did actually get some questions this fall from parents and teachers. The ministry asks us to send out the minister's welcome back letter every fall, and in it he listed a bragging of how many new educators were going to be hired. 9, and the number was 900 educators to focus on direct supports for student literacy. And that's very vague. So the questions I've gotten is, what does that mean in terms of what's been provided? Did that actually result in an increase in the number of literacy learning supports in our system? Because I know that at the same time as the funding for this new funding for literacy intervention, Teachers for Literacy Intervention was announced, another PPF was also withdrawn at the same time. So could staff clarify how that 900 new educators for the province with direct roles in student literacy, what that means for the TDSB? And the other question I've gotten is, how do, with this new funding, new model, how do schools then access support? So I have some schools that have identified additional learning needs in literacy, and some of them already have, actually many of my schools already have Wilson or Empower in place, but some don't. So they've asked for who do they turn to for advice and coaching and that sort of thing. Or teachers have asked in terms of to meet student needs.
Thank you.
So thank you for the question, and through the chair, part of the funding that went to supporting some of the new coaches that we use within the actual, that were designated to specific schools. And I'm going to ask Executive Superintendent Strangway to make reference to some of the other resources that were put in place with the additional funding. Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you for the question, Trustee Arts. As you know, since 2019, the TDSB self-funded the early literacy intervention model. So as Lisa mentioned, we were able to expand the number of schools and use the funding to support the expansion of schools. And part of that PPF was for more tiered resources. So, and Colleen spoke to the goal of ensuring every school has a tier 2, tier 3 resource. And I think we've actually hit that mark. In terms of your question about where can schools go for support, they can reach out to the early years literacy department and the special education department. Depending on the nature of the resource or support that they need, they can go through those avenues.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to staff for this really comprehensive report. So at this point, we need to have a mover and a seconder for receipt of the report. Moved by Trustee Chernos-Lynn, seconded by Trustee Rajwani. Are we doing e-scribe or hands? E-scribe. Vote in. Trustee Shan had to go. Do we still have one? Yeah. Are we still okay?
I mean, and everyone's quiet, we all talking about
Okay.
it?
We're just tallying the vote. Trustee Hastings, could we have your vote, please? Trustee Hastings is in favor, and that carries. Thank you. So we're moving on to the next item in the agenda, which is the supporting newcomer/refugee students and families. Could I have staff report back on this?
Thank you, and through the chair, this particular report will provide trustees with an update of some of the outstanding work that we are doing in our communities across our district with respect to newcomers and refugees. It's my pleasure to have Century Assigned Principal Suzanne Choued speak to this particular report.
Thank you. Through the chair, good evening. This report speaks to the support that the TDSB provide to newcomers, students, and families, including refugee families. In the past 2 years, the TDSB has welcomed newcomer families from around the world. This has been successful with its smooth transition for students into TDSB schools and communities, through an intentional and comprehensive onboarding strategy that includes some of the following actions: building strong partnership with external agencies. Next slide, please. The TDSB participated as a member of the City Community Agency Table for Refugee Claimant Arrivals, Task Force for Afghan Newcomers, and the Task Force for Ukraine Newcomers. This participation allows for regular update and interaction with the City of Toronto, provincial and federal agencies, and external partners such as COSTI and the Red Cross regarding program services for newcomer families. Next slide, please. It also allows to align resources and services such as on-site orientation and registration sessions to ensure a smooth transition of students into our schools. We also collaborated and partnered with the humanity and faith spaces to ensure updates and support for newcomer families and students. Next slide, please. One of the key actions is the collaboration and work within TDSB Central Department. So TDSB Central Departments continue to collaboratively coordinate programs and services to support the newcomer students and their families. The TDSB Central Department also provide additional services based on emerging needs. The report outlines some examples of key services that each of the central department provide. Example, planning department assigns schools based on various considerations. The community services facilitate on-site registration. Transportation develop a comprehensive transportation plan for students, including busing to curriculum night at schools. Employee services provides access to additional allocation. Special education and inclusion coordinates timely access to special education services. Professional support services provide services as required. Parent and community engagement office provides support and services regarding settlement services and interpretation services. Business Services Department provides a variety of in-kind and monetary donations. Continuing education offers summer school programs. Welcoming communities provide tutoring, educational programs, and facilitate March break programs and other sports and art programs. Library and learning resources curate and share resources to support students, families, and educators. The ESL department supports schools with on-site initial assessment and first language assessment for appropriate placement and programming. Next slide, please. They also support in developing and implementing age-appropriate literacy and numeracy programming for students with limited prior schooling opportunities. They build capacity for programming across the system through professional development plan that include learning sessions and job-embedded opportunities at various schools. Build capacity among teachers to use multilingualism as a framework for instruction and assessment at targeted school, and support new teachers through mentoring coaching program. We also coordinate welcoming events, and happy to report that the most current event was at Thorncliffe Public School on Saturday, October 14, and was well attended with over 200 participants and volunteers. Lastly, for recently arrived refugee claimants, action included participating, as mentioned earlier, in the City Community Agency table for refugee claimant arrivals to receive updates from the city and to provide any answer or clarity for questions that may arise, to enhance awareness, to identify urgent and pressing issues, and to align and coordinate resources and services. We have ongoing communication with external agencies, and we assign the school as per the criteria mentioned through the previous talk about the planning department. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Mr. Ruid. We're also pleased to have join us as part of this presentation and responding to inquiries, Executive Superintendent Spiropoulos, who's with us this evening, and online Associate Director Zucker. We welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a little bit of a speakers list. Trustee Rajwani is first.
So thank you to the team for this outstanding report. I think it's great to see all of this work being done. I have a very specific question in terms of advice for community groups in my ward, which is Ward 14. We know that we're going to be getting hundreds of refugee children and families from Central Asia in the early new year. They are looking for guidance and support in terms of readiness so that when they arrive that they have a clear path. There seems to be in conversations and dialogue that there's gaps in getting testing done for English to see where they stand, their assessments done. And many of the children that will be coming will have, like you spoke, haven't had access to education in quite some time, as well as access for families and parents in terms of English resources so that they can get the ground running from a viability and employment perspective. And so my question is to get advice on sharing that information so we as TDSB is ready for this is just one segment of refugees that I'm aware of that are coming. Number two, from a partnership opportunity, as I consider this community-centric settlement, the work that you're doing, both with faith groups and organizations. So how do we create spaces for dialogue where I'm happy to help facilitate those conversations so that we are ready when these groups are coming and we have partners alongside to ensure that it's a seamless transition for these families?
Thank you. And through the chair, I'll ask Century Assigned Principal Reed to respond.
Thank you so much for the question. We at TDSB, we are having some experience and practice with supporting newcomer families as they transition into our school and even being proactive to do it before. So we always at a central level, we do a task force related to the incoming group of families, and we start working to build a strategy that would work for this particular group in communication and collaboration with outside agencies and advocacy group. So we have practiced with the Syrian newcomers, Afghan newcomers, Ukraine, and now with the refugee claimants that have been moved to the West. So we have a strategy, we have steps to follow, we have work that has been done, and we continue to improve and work through it. Communication with our department will start the ball running. We've already been proactive in assigning schools to where we think that this group might be coming or another group. We work through assessment, so we extended our allocation for assessment so we can be also proactive in providing and reallocating assessment support in elementary school through the itinerant ESL, and in secondary we have more staff now trained to do the assessment so we can help with that. As for partnership, this is what we are working through. This is our goal, to create more and more task force and partnership with outside agencies so we can work together to align support. Thank you.
Thank you. So from a pragmatic perspective, what would be the next step? For me to connect you with this specific group that is interested in partnering, and I would appreciate being part of that dialogue as well.
Thank you. And through the chair, the best next step would actually be to reach out by email to Suzanne in order to start a dialogue. It's something that happens on a regular basis with different community groups and organizations. And one of the things that Suzanne has always been more than willing to do is reach out and meet with communities in order to identify what are the specific needs and what are the program needs and how do we support. So definitely reaching out by email. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you. And thank you. So the next speaker is Trustee Dawson.
Thank you. And through the chair, I have a number of questions. How many refugees do we have in our system? And then a supplementary question. What do we spend on refugees and how is it funded?
So through the chair, just give me 1 second.
Sure.
So through the chair, with respect to newcomers, we have approximately 20,000 newcomers that are within our system. With respect to refugees, we have approximately 4,000 to 5,000.
Sorry, through the chair, I can speak to this. I received the information this morning from planning and enrollment. So I have the last 5 years data, if that will help. In 2018-19, we had 971. In 1920, we had 709. In 2021, we had 151. In 21-22, we had 1,795. And in 22-23, up until, and it goes on from September 1st of one year to October 31st of the next year. So we're still counting for this year, but we're just at over 2,200 that were being classified as refugees in our student enrollment system. With regards to funding, those students are funded like every other student. That being said, there are funding that is received through the ESL grant because we receive funding for students that in the first 4 years that they attend TDSB, that they have, if their home country is not English. And so that's how we receive additional funding through the ESL grant. And with that funding that we receive, it's only the numbers that are in place as of October 31st. And that's really important because as you indicated, there will be a number of refugees expected to come after October 31st. When this happened with Syrian newcomers a while back, we actually, the ministry recognized this and boards received additional funding through the advocacy of school boards. So we would expect that same advocacy may be necessary both at a staff and possibly at a political level once we see where the numbers lie. Again, because we know that these students will have needs when they come. If they do not come by October 31st, we do not receive funding in the current school year. So I think that's where the funding is supplemented to help provide support for these students. We also receive donations from different groups. So as far as spending goes, we spend additional funding on ESL support, and we also spend we spend additional funding on money on transportation, about $350,000, and additional resources other than the ESL direct support. And we're talking about assessments and everything else. We're looking at about another $200,000. So in total, in 2022-23, with just over 22,000 students, we spent, and I'm just trying to, total the number. probably about $600,000 additional, plus any ESL direct support that they receive in schools from ESL teachers and other support, which are funded through the ESL grant. Hope that helps.
That is really helpful. Thank you. Glad asked the question, and please keep us updated on any advocacy needed at our level as well. Another question, how is our don't ask, don't tell policy being upheld? So one of the things that's happening in my ward, and I know in other wards, is that people are being asked for paperwork. In some cases, they're being asked to cancel documents. And I don't see anywhere in the presentation any work that's being done with the International Student Admissions Office, and that seems to be where a bit of the challenges are happening. And so I'm just wondering, what is the partnership with that office, and also what are we doing to uphold the don't ask, don't tell?
So through the chair, I'm going to ask Associate Director Zucker to start, and then Executive Superintendent Spropoulos to also speak to this particular item.
Thank you. And I do think that Executive Superintendent will probably be able to speak more eloquently to this, but it is a practice that the board has for our newcomers. And it is something that we do support through policy. I think the trustees passed that in 2007. So that would be where we would be using or following that policy. And we do and have provided training in the past year to office administrators, and continue to do that as the need arises and as we see that we may be having challenges. As new staff arrive at TDSB, we want to make sure that we are supporting them so that we can best support these students. And I'd turn it over to Executive Superintendent Spropoulos to add anything.
Thank you, Associate Director Zucker, and through the chair, Associate. And I speak to this after having been away from the portfolio for about a year or so, but having extensive experience connected to the work in the years before that. And Associate Director Zucker was bang on. We have had what we call a don't ask, don't tell policy in place for many years. And in addition to the training, there is a letter that is sent out annually, which is very prescriptive, which intends to serve the purpose of giving schools very detailed information of how to proceed with respect to new registrations. I will say, again, from experience, that there are cases, there are instances in schools where the conversations where people who walk through our front doors don't always go the way that we would intend them to. And there are also instances where through the course of the conversation, because there has to be some questions that are asked related to registration, where families don't end up registering their children in schools. And if you say to me, Jim, why is it that that happens? I would say that the most common reason why that happens, and I say this on a case-by-case basis, is that through the course of their conversations, it is disclosed or discovered that the family are visitors. And the Ministry of Education is very, very clear with respect to what our responsibilities are with respect to students who are visitors. Fees must be paid. And I say that knowing that this board has heard through many other different presentations the impact that foreign student, international student fees play with respect to our budget process. And that we do our absolute very best to create an equal footing where if there are some students who, for example, are paying $16,000 a year, that if a student who is a visitor is allowed to register for school, it creates an uneven footing. And I will say that we've experienced audits in the past from the ministry where we have to account for every student registration. And most recently, we've had to pay back in millions of dollars because of students who are improperly registered. Now, knowing how difficult a process that can be for a family who is here under very difficult circumstances already and experiences that type of response in a school. So, for example, if they're not visitors, but they're intimidated by the process, because it's a hard process, the question then becomes, what do they do then? And that is what we continue, I believe, to be challenged most by as a system. And there is no replacement for the on-the-ground relationships that we have with the local agencies in order to work through those cases on a case-by-case basis. Here's what it looks like. And this is my biggest fear, that there are some families who go through this process and then are able to be in touch with some local community, some agency, some organization, and that organization has the relationship with us to be able to make a phone call and say, hey, Jim, hey, Audley, hey, Suzanne, we have this situation. You think we can be able to work through it? And we're able to, based on relationship, because the agency calls, they're in the place of advocacy, we're able to work it out and resolve the issue. Our concern is how many families don't have that access. So how many go to the school, have a negative experience, don't know who to call, don't know where to go, don't know what to do. So the most important part of that work is for us to continue to engage agencies through yourselves. I mean, through the chair, Trustee Dawson knows, because she's helped us work through some of these very challenging issues. Because people call her and she calls us, and then we solve the problem. But they had access to Trustee Dawson. So what I would continue to say to organizations is we need to hit the ground, talk to as many of these local agencies, like the one that Trustee Rajwani just mentioned, so that they have contacts, they can reach out to us, and we can work through these separate issues. I'm sorry for the long-windedness of the answer, but I think it was important to give you sort of an idea of what we're challenged by on the ground, and most specifically, what our biggest concern is with respect to newcomer families. I hope that helps.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, that was helpful. And I do, just also kind of along the lines of what Trustee Wajwani was saying, I definitely encourage my colleagues to proactively go out and find these agencies in your communities and establish that connection if you haven't already, because a lot of these individual cases do tend to come up that are unique, or the families don't know how to navigate the situation, and it's helpful to have us in contact with the agencies so that we can move things along. Okay, my next question is, there are multiple humanitarian crises unfolding in the world, and we're hearing reports from the city that support systems are already overwhelmed. How is the TDSB working with other orders of government to anticipate the magnitude of refugee children arriving, and how will they be supported?
So through the chair, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Reed. I know one of the things that she does on a regular basis is reach out to community agencies and organizations in order to partner to provide support. But she also reaches out to the City of Toronto and other groups in order to orchestrate the nature of the support, to identify who the individuals are. One of the examples that I'll just provide is coming out of the large number of refugee students or refugee individuals that landed on our streets this summer. One of the things that we had happen is having individuals go into the specific churches in order to identify how many students are here? How many students need to be supported by the TDSB? And although in that particular case, what we identified was that there were not actually any students, but part of what we do is making sure, even if it's in the summer or it's over the Christmas holiday, the holidays, there's an actual intentional process to reach out to those particular groups that are in need to see how we can support. And there's a myriad of ways that have been outlined as far as the nature of the support that Mr. Wood can speak to. But I think it's important to know that each time that there is a critical situation within communities, we actively go towards them in collaboration with the City of Toronto, with other agencies and organizations in order to see what role can we play. And that role at times may be different depending on what the specific need is of that group. Want to make any further comments? Thank you.
I would just thank you, Associate Director Simon, and through the chair, we are on multiple task force for the city and federal government, and we created through the 2 years that passed contacts that we can reach to at any time. And based on the emerging needs, the news, global and local, we reach to them. In the past summer, what has been done that many agencies were closed for vacation and others, as mentioned earlier, we reached to the city, and and proud to say that our TDSB effort helped to create this city government table that is now established. That was all of some efforts that we advocated for at TDSB and asked for to be also on the table. We also reached to other organization, advocacy group, and we work collaboratively, and we also appreciate agencies reaching to us so we can continue to work and be more proactive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, through the chair, a question about Greenwood Secondary School specifically and how it's promoted as a school designed for new immigrants, high school age students. It doesn't seem to be on the newcomer website. How would people know to find it? Are there plans to expand that?
We did have a collaborative work with the Greenwood staff and the principal in particular, and it is on our website in many locations, particularly under the ESL department page, and we work with them through the admission process just to speak to the fact that students would be offered the option to be in their home school or in at the Greenwood as a location for ESL programming. So we just wanted to ensure while working with them that their families do know that they have the option of being at their home school. In previous years, before we worked together with the Greenwood and with the admission office, families weren't given this option. They were only given the option of being at the Greenwood because they were considered ESL students or English language learners. So now families have the option, and they might choose to stay at their home school with the services and programs available at home school, or choose to be at Greenwood where they can get additional support and additional programming that might be required for specific needs. So they have both options. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any plans to expand the newcomer specific schools or programming in some of our underutilized schools potentially?
Yes, through the chair, ESL programming is being extended in all schools. We are receiving lots of requests for our small department staff to be everywhere and to support with ESL programming. The reason why every school is acknowledging that many of our students at a system level, we have more than 60% of our students speak a language other than English at home. So the ESL programming is being extended, and the allocation is being increased in many schools that usually don't have the ESL programming, like, for example, in secondary ESLA, ESLB, or ESLCND. The one thing that we're trying to work through is more professional learning support and the plan to consider ESL as a program universal to all students, and that all classroom teachers support with English language learners and using multilingualism and other strategies that ensure students are reaching their potential and being supported in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you. And that maybe ties into my next question. Do we have a map of where ESL programs are being offered across the city?
Through the chair, ESL program is and should be in every school. Maybe what we're asking for is the LEAP program, which is only for students who have had some gaps in their educational opportunities or limited because of different reasons, being one of them being waiting for refugee status to Canada while being in other countries where they won't be allowed to be in school. So this one we have a map, we have certain areas, and we review it in 2 years back to try to spread it across the system and the district, and we try to make it more accessible, specifically because some families might not choose this program because of transportation challenges and distance. So we did review it, we have the map, and we're happy to provide it. Thank you.
And I think the expectation is that ESL programming is in every school. Part of, and I believe part of what you're actually going to is the notion that some schools provide it in larger quantities than other schools. I think that that's the key point, and I think our expectation, every school should be having the programming. We need to just make sure that we continue working towards fulsome programming in all of our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really helpful. If you could share that map for the LEAD program in our an upcoming update, that would be amazing. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last speaker on our list is Trustee Reggie Kulisinghe.
Thank you, through the chair. I wanted to thank staff for this report. It's actually quite close to me. My whole family, basically our whole community, arrived as refugees. So I think it's very close to my heart. So I think what's really important is that continue to separate kind of newcomers and refugee experiences. It's important that also in our work that we're aware that a group may share language or a faith, but one may come as a newcomer and one may come from another country as a refugee. And I was reflecting on my own experience. And I remember in the 90s, there was this influx of Tamil refugees that came. And I remember hearing about how many students during that time experienced so much culture shock. They were disengaged from the system, they were bullied, even mistreated or misunderstood by staff, which led to many Tamil youth, especially Tamil boys, being stereotyped as troublemakers, and many being expelled by not understanding the extreme trauma and pain many of these students experience. And I remember when I was in elementary school, I'd always be the translator for Tamil students in my class. I wasn't a strong Tamil speaker, and I'm just reflecting on how those students must have felt so stuck, not being able to communicate what they're going through in a proper way. So I'm happy to see that now we're going beyond translation and are looking at settlement services and various departments to help them in this process. So my question is, we have refugees arriving, they're being placed across the system. What training and development is being offered to principals and teachers because we're seeing a rise in xenophobia. We know that not all refugees, not all experiences are treated the same, and there are biases. So how we need to make sure that our teachers are able to identify when a student is struggling, when they need further supports. So how are we training teachers and principals to help them identify how to support a refugee student?
So through the chair, thank you for pointing out a really important notion about how we provide services and training to our staff. One of the things that I know Principal Druid does on a regular basis is meet with principals across our system around this particular question or concern, and making sure that how is the programming being done in the school in order to meet the specific needs of newcomers within our buildings, and making sure that it's not simply just around the programming, but also how do we support with respect to staff? How do we support with respect to home and community, and making sure that those other aspects are considered. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Reid in order to speak to some of the specifics around the teacher training, because that's something that we have done as a district to ensure that teachers are provided with the learning opportunities that are necessary. Ms. Reid?
Thank you so much. And through the chair, thank you for your questions. And I really appreciate, and I thank you for sharing your experience as a refugee myself. I can really relate to what you have shared. In our approach, we have a type of two-tier approach. One is a professional learning plan for the whole system, which include ESL teachers, those who teach in what we call it self-contained ESL classes, and classroom teachers. And we do it on a monthly basis, where we look at strategies, including, as I said, appreciation and working through multilingualism, not as an accommodation, more so as a framework to support and make students feel honored, reflected, and they can appreciate their and show their understanding of the curriculum through their first language, parallel to English. So this is one approach. We do targeted job embedded as well. We do mentoring coaching for newly appointed or hired ESL teacher. Now, for specific communities where we see a specific needs, we collaborate usually, and to start with the equity department, we work on some professional learning regarding combating hate and racism strategy mandates. And we also work through some professional learning for principal, vice principal, and work as well through the Human Rights Office on some professional learning for principal and for staff. So this is just part of what we do, but happy to provide more information if required. Thank you.
Thank you. That is helpful. I just had another follow-up question on something else. So we do have a strong don't ask, don't tell policy. I'm thinking of those students with precarious immigration status. And in fact, the situation that Executive Superintendent Spropoulos mentioned happened very recently, and I've been dealing with it. We had a family that came as refugees, but came through another country to come here. To the US. And because of that experience, they were expected to pay this visitor, they were treated as an international student versus a refugee. And because this family was part of my community, they approached me and we had that conversation and we were able to find a solution. But as a trustee, I found that conversation really hard to navigate. So how are we going to I am worried that we are missing a lot of families because they are intimidated by this process. And once they hear a no, or once they hear about visitors fees, that they turn away. Is there a secondary process where we perhaps, when we have folks coming to us to inquire about schools, they mention they're refugee, but then we don't hear about them is there an audit that we can do to maybe go through that list to kind of touch base with these students? Because I'm worried that there are a lot of refugees that don't have access to organizations, aren't engaging with them, are scared, and we're missing out on those voices. So is there a secondary process that we can maybe try?
So thank you for that particular question. I think part of what we will be doing is providing a follow-up session for trustees in order to provide you further insight into questions like that. I still believe that education for our principals and our teachers and our staff around what the expectations that are actually outlined in PO 61 is key, because that's the policy that effectively outlines what the board expectations are with individuals that are coming to our country as refugees. Education will be a key part of that. For now, we will be providing further information to trustees around scenarios like that shortly in the upcoming month. So we'll have an opportunity to address those kind of scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just want to end with, I hope so, because I feel the policy is strong, but it's not being acted out in schools. And the scenario that Executive Superintendent Spropoulos mentioned is happening. And to give you an example, the family that I was working with, the father was one of the doctors that was operating in the no-fire zone hospitals in the height of the genocide. He was tortured by the Sri Lankan government. He came here. There is documentation. There are stories about him. But a person like that had trouble registering his kids in school. And I want to also flag to staff, there is an organization called Justice for Child and Youth, and they work with families with precarious immigration status. I know my time's running out, but I just want to finish off by saying they have identified spots across Toronto where there may be larger populations of undocumented immigration, families with precarious immigration status. So I want to also just leave that with staff in hopes that maybe they'll potentially reach out with them to learn more about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Reggie Kulisingam. Can I pass the chair just for a moment? Okay. So I understand that we'll have an information session on November 9th around this. And it's been said a couple of times, like by staff and alluded to by trustees throughout. But it's right in our policy P061 that was adopted on May 16, 2007. And I just point to the specific direction. The policy in section 49.1 of the Education Act regarding the obligation to admit students without full immigration status will be communicated annually to all school administrators and school office staff, and schools will implement admission procedures in accordance with these requirements. Like, I've heard that this was working well prior to the pandemic, and somehow it's not happening. So it's there clearly in the policy, and, you know, the question to staff, it can be, you know, articulated more fully in our information session, but I really would like a fulsome answer as to why this is not happening the way it should be. So I'll take back the chair. And I think that's the end of our speakers list. So could I have a motion, a mover and a seconder to accept the report? Moved by Trustee Dawson, seconded by Trustee Chernos-Lynn. Are we doing it on eScribe? eScribe is coming up. Trustee Hastings, how do you vote? Trustee Hastings votes in favor.
Sorry, it's not loading for me in favor.
Trustee Dawson is in favor. Do we have? That carries. So at this point, I'd like to declare the meeting adjourned. And Could I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by trustee King, seconded by trustee Rajwani. All in favor of adjournment? Aye. And thank you so much to staff and everyone for this meeting. Hey, run.